The order came at 2:47 in the morning, and the man who gave it never expected anyone to survive long enough to question it. Colonel Richard Hargrove sat alone in a secure communications room, his hands steady, his voice calm, as he typed 4 words into an encrypted channel. Let the general fall. He wasn't angry. He wasn't afraid. That was the worst part. He typed it the way a man orders coffee, without hesitation, without guilt, because in his mind the mission had already been decided. What he never calculated, what his entire carefully built plan never accounted for, was the woman sitting alone on a frozen ridge 7,000 miles away, looking through a scope older than most of the soldiers on the base, seeing exactly what he needed no one to see. Before we go any further, if this is your first time here, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Drop a comment below and tell me what city you are watching from. I want to see just how far this story travels. Now let's get into it. She didn't walk into the briefing room like someone who expected to be welcomed. Sergeant Emily Carter had learned a long time ago that rooms like this one, rooms full of men with expensive gear and expensive opinions, had a way of going quiet, the wrong kind of quiet, when she stepped through the door. Not the respectful kind, not the kind that meant people were paying attention because they wanted to hear what she had to say. The quiet that followed Emily into rooms was the kind that came with sideways glances, with whispered conversations that stopped half a sentence too late, with eyes that swept over her and then looked elsewhere, as if deciding without any real thought that she wasn't worth the energy of a second look. She was used to it. That didn't mean it didn't cut. The briefing room at Fort Carson was cold the way military buildings were always cold, not because the heating didn't work, but because nobody in the chain of command ever thought comfort was worth prioritizing when there was a mission to plan. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. A long table stretched down the center of the room, covered in maps, satellite images, and equipment manifests. Around that table sat 11 other operators, all of them members of a specialized extraction unit that had been assembled specifically for this mission, and every single one of them had something Emily didn't. They had hardware. The man to her left had a weapon system that could calculate wind drift elevation change and target movement in real time. The scope alone cost more than Emily's truck. The woman 2 seats down had a communications rig that could bounce encrypted signals off 3 different satellites simultaneously. The man at the far end of the table had an exoskeletal support brace on his left arm that could stabilize his rifle through a 7.2 magnitude earthquake. These were not soldiers. These were walking weapons platforms, human beings upgraded to the point where the line between person and machine had gotten genuinely difficult to see. And then there was Emily. Emily Carter had a rifle. It was a bolt-action system, carefully maintained, upgraded where upgrades were possible, but fundamentally the same kind of weapon that soldiers had carried in conflicts long before any of the people in this room had been born. No smart scope, no AI targeting assistance, no predictive ballistic computer, just glass steel years of practice and a human brain that had been doing this long enough to know things that no algorithm had yet been able to quantify. She set the case down beside her chair and sat without announcing herself. Nobody greeted her. The mission briefing started at 0600, led by Lieutenant Colonel Sandra Reyes, a sharp-featured woman in her mid-40s who had the kind of voice that made every sentence sound like a direct order, even when she was asking a question. Reyes laid out the situation without preamble. Major General William Hayes decorated Commander 3 Tours, the kind of officer whose loss would be felt in ways that went far beyond a single operation, had gone dark during a classified reconnaissance operation in a mountain region that the briefing conspicuously avoided naming with any specificity. What they did say was this: he was alive, his position had been confirmed through indirect communication, and extracting him would require moving a team through terrain that was heavily monitored by hostile forces who had in recent weeks demonstrated a sophisticated understanding of standard military extraction protocols. In other words, the enemy knew how they operated, which meant they had to do something different. Reyes walked them through the extraction route, the communications blackout windows, the rally points. She talked about the drones that would be deployed in advance, the surveillance systems that would give them real-time ground coverage, the AI-assisted threat detection that would flag any human movement within a 2-kilometer radius of the extraction path. She did not mention Emily. Not once in 45 minutes of detailed operational planning did Lieutenant Colonel Reyes refer to the woman sitting at the far end of the table by name, by rank, or by role. Emily watched it happen with the calm attention of someone who had been in enough rooms to know that being invisible was sometimes more useful than being seen, but she felt the shape of it clearly. She was here because someone had put her name on a list. She was here because the list had to have a certain number of bodies and her name had been available. That was all. When the briefing ended and operators began moving to collect their gear, the man to her left, a barrel-chested sergeant, first class named Torres, who wore his experience the way some men wore a uniform, like it was a fundamental part of his identity, looked at her case and then looked at her with an expression she had cataloged so many times it barely registered anymore. The mixture of curiosity and mild contempt that people directed at things they considered outdated. "That a bolt action?" Torres said. "It is," Emily said. "Huh." He picked up his own weapon case. "They still make those." "They made mine in a different decade," Emily said. "Still works." Torres made a small sound that wasn't quite a laugh. "No offense," he said in the specific tone of voice that meant he was not particularly concerned whether offense was taken or not. "But with everything we've got on this op, drones, AI targeting satellite surveillance, what exactly is a bolt-action sniper going to add?" Emily looked at him for a moment. "I'm going to watch," she said. Torres stared at her. "Watch." "That's right." He shook his head slightly and moved away. Emily watched him go, then looked back at the map still spread on the table, and for a long moment she stood there alone, studying the terrain lines, the elevation markers, the proposed route of the extraction team. There was a ridge, a specific ridge northeast of the third rally point, that had caught her eye during the briefing because nobody had mentioned it. It wasn't in the drone coverage zone. It was technically outside the AI surveillance perimeter. It was the kind of place that systems would miss because systems were designed to focus on what the parameters told them to focus on, and whoever had designed those parameters had decided that ridge wasn't worth worrying about. Emily pulled out a small notebook, actual paper, spiral-bound the kind you could buy at any drugstore, and made a note. She did not share the note with anyone. She wasn't sure yet why she didn't. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was the years of experience that had taught her the difference between a feeling and a fact, and that the most dangerous mistake a sniper could make was reporting a feeling as if it were a fact. Or maybe it was something simpler, something she didn't want to examine too closely. Right then, the knowledge that if she brought that ridge to the briefing room table, 11 pairs of eyes would look at her the way Torres had looked at her rifle, and they would explain patiently that the systems had already assessed the area and that she needed to trust the systems. She left the briefing room alone and went to zero her rifle in the pre-dawn dark. The night before deployment, Emily sat in her bunk and called her mother. This was not something she did before every mission. There were missions where calling home felt like creating a weight she couldn't afford to carry, like handing someone a piece of yourself to hold while you went somewhere you might not come back from. But this mission felt different in a way she couldn't name yet, and Emily Carter had survived long enough to respect the unnamed feelings. Her mother's voice was warm and immediate, the way it always was. "You're going out," her mother said. It wasn't a question. "I'm going out," Emily confirmed. There was a brief silence, the specific silence of a woman who had watched her daughter choose a life that frightened her and had made a deliberate, loving decision not to say so out loud anymore. "You eat?" Emily smiled at the ceiling of her bunk. "I ate, Mom." "Good." A pause. "You be careful, baby." "I'm always careful." "You're never careful," her mother said with absolute certainty. "You're good. There's a difference. You think being good is the same as being careful. It's not." Emily lay there for a moment after the call ended, holding her phone against her chest, thinking about the difference between good and careful. She had heard lectures on operational discipline, on protocol, on the importance of following established procedure in high-risk environments. She had never once heard anyone in a military briefing room talk about the difference between being good and being careful. And she thought not for the first time that her mother understood something about survival that most tactical manuals missed entirely. She slept 4 hours and woke up before her alarm. The transit was long, and she spent most of it with her eyes closed and her thoughts organized, running through scenarios the way a chess player runs through positions. Not because she believed the scenarios she imagined would match the reality she encountered, but because the exercise of imagining them kept her mind from the particular kind of tightness that came from not having enough to do. She thought about the ridge. She thought about the ridge a lot. When the transport put them down and the team began moving to their designated positions, Emily was assigned to overwatch at a location approximately 900 meters from the nearest point of the extraction route. It was a respectable overwatch position in the sense that it offered good sight lines over the approach terrain, but it was also precisely where a standard overwatch position would be, which meant it was where any competent adversary would expect a sniper to be placed, and the coverage it offered, once you factored in the terrain and the angle, largely duplicated what the drone systems were already providing. She went where she was assigned, she set up her position, she did everything according to protocol, and then when the comms check was complete and the team began to move, Emily started scanning. Not where the systems were scanning, not where the protocols directed her attention. She started with the ridge. The first hour of the extraction was clean. The drone feeds showed empty terrain. The AI threat detection reported no movement signatures. The advanced scout reported the rally points clear. Torres and the rest of the team moved with the smooth, efficient confidence of people who trusted their systems, which was exactly the right kind of confidence to have when your systems were working. Emily kept her scope on the ridge. The problem with watching something that showed you nothing was the same problem as listening to silence. The mind began to fill the absence with signal, began to construct patterns from noise, began to manufacture the thing it was looking for simply because it was looking so hard. Emily knew this. She had been trained to know this. She had spent years learning to distinguish between genuine observation and the brain's tendency to hallucinate confirmation. So she was not looking for something to be there. She was watching the way a person watches when they have set aside expectation and allowed themselves to simply receive. At 1 hour and 14 minutes into the extraction, she saw movement. It was small, barely a shift in the visual field. The kind of movement that a person makes when they've been holding very still for a long time, and their body against their will makes the tiny automatic adjustments that bodies make: a muscle twitch, a controlled exhale, a fractional reposition. Not the movement of someone who was careless. The movement of someone who was extremely careful and still couldn't entirely defeat the fundamental biology of being a living creature. Emily stilled herself completely. She breathed slowly. She looked at the specific spot, not too hard, not with the direct focus that paradoxically made small details harder to see. She used her peripheral vision the way she had been taught, letting the image come to her rather than reaching for it. There was a human being on that ridge. She was certain. She clicked her comms. Command Overwatch 1. I have a possible hostile contact on the northeast ridge. Grid reference. She rattled off the coordinates, requesting acknowledgement. A pause, then Overwatch 1 drone coverage of that grid shows no contact. AI threat assessment is green. Confirm you have visual or are reporting possible. Reporting possible, Emily said. Visual movement consistent with a concealed firing position. Could be an echo. Requesting we slow the team's advance for 60 seconds while I confirm. Another pause. This one was longer. Overwatch 1 technology has that area covered. You're seeing shadows. Maintain your position and do not interrupt team movement. Command out. Emily lowered her hand from the comms. She looked back at the ridge. The shape was still there. She thought about her mother's voice. You're good. There's a difference, you know? She thought about Torres asking her what exactly a bolt-action sniper was going to add to an operation with drones and AI targeting and satellite surveillance. She thought about the word watch and the way she had said it to him and what she had actually meant by it, which was not the passive subordinate watching that he had heard, but the kind of watching that required everything she had, every year of training, every hour of practice, every lesson learned in conditions that didn't forgive mistakes, the kind of watching that technology was, for all its advantages, not yet capable of. She put her eye back to the scope. The shape on the ridge settled, became definitively, unmistakably a person, a professional. The way they had positioned themselves using the natural shadow of a rock formation that would not appear significant in a satellite image, at a range that put them just at the outer edge of standard drone surveillance parameters. This wasn't improvised. This wasn't someone who had stumbled into a firing position. This was someone who had studied the systems, understood the coverage gaps, and put themselves precisely in the one place the technology would not be looking. Emily's blood went cold, not with fear, with understanding. Because the knowledge she was holding in that moment, the knowledge that this position had been chosen by someone who knew where the blind spots were, was a different category of knowledge than anything she had been briefed on. And the implications of it unfolding in the back of her mind even as she kept her eye to the scope and her body perfectly still, were beginning to shape themselves into something that went far beyond a single enemy sniper on a ridge. "Command," she said again, her voice absolutely level. "I have confirmed visual on a hostile element in firing position. Requesting immediate Overwatch 1, I said stand down. Technology has the area covered. If there was a threat, command the technology does not have this covered." Her voice stayed flat, controlled. "The hostile is positioned specifically outside our drone parameters. This is not a random placement. I need you to halt the team advance right now." A longer silence. "Sergeant Carter," a different voice now, harder, deliberate. "Your role on this operation is observation. You are not cleared to interrupt or redirect the extraction team based on unconfirmed visual assessment. Hold your position. That is a direct order." Emily looked at her scope. General Hayes was moving toward the extraction point. The figure on the ridge was making the small, controlled adjustments of a person who was preparing to fire. She had perhaps 45 seconds. The wind was 9 knots, slightly variable, trending left. The range to the ridge was beyond what most snipers would attempt. Not beyond what she could do, not in good conditions, not on a day when everything she had was functioning exactly as it should, but beyond what she could do with certainty. The margin for error was real. The consequences of error were real. She thought about the orders she'd been given. She thought about what would happen if she followed it. She thought about her mother's voice, which was a strange thing to think about in that particular moment, but which was nonetheless present and clear. "You think being good is the same as being careful. It's not." Emily Carter breathed out slowly, and she fired. The shot crossed the distance between her and the ridge in less time than it takes to finish a thought. The sound of it echoed across the mountain terrain and died, and the comms erupted multiple voices. Torres shouting command personnel, demanding to know what had happened. The advanced scout calling in an all clear, because what she was hearing didn't match what her instruments were telling her. And on the northeast ridge, the figure that had been preparing to fire slumped and was still. Emily kept her eye to the scope for 5 long seconds, watching, confirming. Then she said into the comms with the same level voice she had used for every previous transmission. "Hostile target neutralized, northeast ridge. Grid reference as previously reported. I'm sending the coordinates now. Recommend the team halt advance and conduct a secondary sweep of the extraction route, because this position was chosen by someone who knew exactly where our coverage had gaps, which means this ambush was not random." Silence on the comms, an absolute stunned silence. And then Torres' voice, which was different from his earlier voice, stripped of the comfortable certainty that had been sitting in it before. "Say again, Overwatch 1. This ambush was not random," Emily said. "Someone gave them our surveillance parameters. Halt the advance. Clear the route before you move the general." Another silence. It was a different kind of silence. It was the silence of people beginning to understand that the mission they had planned and the mission they were actually on were not the same mission. The extraction team halted. The route was swept. A secondary position was found. Another concealed element placed with the same careful knowledge of the system's blind spots deactivated now that the primary shot had failed to take place. General Hayes was moved to a different extraction corridor. He arrived at the rally point alive. And Emily Carter sat in her Overwatch position in the mountain cold and stared at the coordinates on her map and thought about the note she had made in her spiral-bound notebook the morning of the briefing and about the voice on the comms that had given her a direct order to stand down and about the specific word that voice had used when referring to the unconfirmed threat. Technology has the area covered. Not our teams have the area covered. Not our assets have the area covered. Technology, as if the person speaking trusted the technology more than the human beings operating it. Or, in this thought, arrived with the quiet, specific weight of something that had been waiting for her to be ready to receive it, as if the person speaking had known that the technology wouldn't see what was on that ridge, and had been counting on it. She wrote one more note in her notebook. Then she folded it, put it in her breast pocket, and began breaking down her position. She didn't know yet what she had. She didn't know the shape of what was coming. But she had been a sniper long enough to know that the most dangerous moments weren't the ones where you saw the threat clearly. They were the ones where you saw just enough to know the threat was larger than it appeared. The mission was over. The operation she was beginning to understand had barely started. When the team assembled at the extraction point and Torres walked past her without speaking, she noticed that he didn't look at her rifle this time. He looked at her face, and whatever he found there made him look away first. That was something she supposed. Not much, but something. She climbed into the transport and sat alone in the back, and kept her notebook pressed flat against her chest, and spent the long ride back thinking about the voice on the comms that had told her to hold her position, told her the technology had it covered, told her to trust the systems. She thought about who that voice belonged to. She thought about the choice that voice had made in that moment. And she thought about the fact that when the hostile on the ridge had been neutralized and the secondary position had been found, and General Hayes had arrived safely at the rally point, that voice had not come back on the comms to acknowledge what she'd seen or thank her for what she'd done. The voice had gone completely silent. And in Emily Carter's experience, the people who went silent when they should have spoken were exactly the kind of people worth watching. She opened her notebook. She wrote, "Find out who was on command comms." Then she closed it again and leaned her head back and let the sound of the transport carry her toward whatever was waiting. The transport landed at Fort Carson at 0340 hours, and the base was doing what military bases did. In the small hours before dawn, it was running. Generators hummed. Night shift personnel moved between buildings with the particular efficiency of people accustomed to working while the rest of the world slept. Floodlights made hard shadows out of everything. Emily climbed down from the transport with her rifle case in one hand and her notebook in the other, and the first thing she noticed was that nobody came to meet them. That was unusual. After an extraction mission, especially one that had gone sideways in the field, even briefly, even successfully, there was protocol. Debriefs, medical checks, intelligence personnel waiting to collect every observation while it was still fresh. The absence of that process was not an accident. Somebody had decided that the team coming back from this particular mission did not need to be met. Torres noticed it too. She could tell by the way he slowed slightly as they crossed the landing pad, scanning the perimeter with the instinctive threat assessment of a man who had learned that the things missing from a situation were sometimes more significant than the things present. "Where's the debrief team?" he said to no one in particular. "Maybe they're inside," said the advanced scout, a compact, precise woman named Voss, who had a habit of providing optimistic explanations for things that probably deserved more skepticism. "Maybe," Torres said. He didn't sound like he believed it. They were directed to a secondary processing area, not the main debrief suite, but a smaller room, usually used for equipment inventory, and told to wait. Emily sat, the others sat. 40 minutes passed. Then an administrative officer appeared and informed them with the careful flatness of someone delivering a message they had been told not to explain, that individual debriefs had been postponed pending a command-level review of the operation, and that all team members were to return to their quarters and remain available for contact within a 4-hour window. That was all. No explanation, no acknowledgement of what had happened in the field, no mention of the hostile contact on the northeast ridge, the secondary position, the deviation from the extraction route that had kept the general alive. Emily walked out of that room with her notebook pressed flat against her thigh and a feeling in her chest that she recognized from years of field work, the specific quiet alarm of knowing that the shape of something was wrong before she could articulate exactly what the something was. Torres fell into step beside her in the corridor. He didn't say anything for about 30 seconds. Then he said, "That shot." "Yeah," Emily said. "That was..." He stopped, started again. 900 meters more. "More," she said. Another silence. Then, "I didn't think that was possible with your setup." "Most people don't," Emily said. Torres was quiet for another moment. When he spoke again, his voice had changed. The casual superiority had been replaced by something more honest and considerably more uncomfortable. "I was wrong about you," he said. "Earlier, what I said about your rifle." Emily looked at him sideways. "It's fine." "It's not, actually." He said it simply, without drama. "I made a judgment without enough information. That's exactly the kind of mistake that gets people killed out there. And I made it anyway because..." He stopped. "Because the rifle looked old," Emily said. "Because you didn't look like what I expected," Torres said. It was more honest than the rifle comment, and they both knew it. He held her gaze for a second, then looked away. "You saved the general." The general saved himself, Emily said. He had the sense to hold his position when we called the halt. Carter. Torres stopped walking and turned to face her. His expression was the particular expression of a man who had made a decision that cost him something. The command voice that told you to stand down. You know that's going to be a problem. Emily looked at him. Why? Because you didn't stand down. I saved the general's life. I know you did, Torres said. I'm not saying you were wrong. I'm saying they're going to make it a problem anyway. Emily studied him for a moment. There was something behind the words that she was trying to read, not a threat, not exactly. More like a warning from a man who understood how the system processed inconvenient truths and wanted her to understand it too. Who was on the command comms, she said. Torres's expression shifted. Something moved across his face, not quite fear, but the recognition of a category of risk. I don't know for certain, he said, but you have a thought. He was quiet. Torres, get some sleep, Carter, he said and walked away. She watched him go, standing alone in the corridor with her rifle case and her notebook and the sound of the bass running around her in the dark. She stood there long enough to make sure he'd turned the corner, and then she went to her quarters and sat on the edge of her bed and opened the notebook and looked at the last thing she'd written. Find out who was on command comms. She stared at it for a long time. Then she wrote underneath it, Torres knows something. He's scared. She closed the notebook and lay down fully dressed and did not sleep. At 06:17 hours, someone slid a folded piece of paper under her door. She was on her feet before it finished moving across the floor, which told her something about the quality of her not sleeping. She picked it up and unfolded it. 5 words printed in plain block letters, no identifying marks. You were not supposed to fire. Emily turned the paper over. Nothing on the back. She crossed to the door and opened it fast and looked both ways down the corridor. Empty. She stood in the doorway for 5 seconds. Then she stepped back inside, locked the door, and read the message again. You were not supposed to fire. It wasn't a threat exactly. It was something more specific than a threat. It was information. It was someone telling her, someone who knew enough to be inside the building, inside the corridor, to know which door was hers, that the shot she had fired was not an inconvenience to someone's plan. It was a disruption to it. She sat down slowly on the bed and held the paper and thought about the hostile on the ridge positioned precisely in the gap in the drone coverage. She thought about the secondary position placed with the same precision. She thought about the command voice telling her the technology had the area covered, telling her to stand down, telling her that her confirmed visual assessment was less reliable than a system that had been specifically designed to miss what she was looking at. And she thought about the assumption at the center of all of it, the assumption that she would obey. She set the paper on the bed beside her and picked up her notebook. She wrote, they expected me to stay silent. The whole plan required it. Then she sat with that sentence for a long time, feeling its weight. Because if that was true, and the more she examined it, the more certain she became that it was, then the operation had not simply been compromised by an enemy who knew their surveillance parameters. The operation had been designed to fail in a specific way at a specific moment with a specific outcome. General Hayes was supposed to be in the extraction route when the shot on the ridge was taken. The shot was supposed to succeed, and the woman on Overwatch, the woman with the outdated rifle who nobody expected to see anything that the technology didn't confirm, was supposed to watch it happen from 900 meters away and say nothing that anyone would believe. Emily Carter stood up. She had not slept. She had not eaten. She had a folded piece of paper with 5 words on it and a spiral notebook with a handful of observations. She was a sergeant in an army that had just implicitly told her to go to her room and be quiet. She picked up her phone and made a call. It rang 4 times, and then Special Agent Mitchell. The voice was crisp, professionally neutral. The voice of someone accustomed to receiving calls at unusual hours without letting it show. Agent Mitchell, Emily said. My name is Sergeant Emily Carter. I was the Overwatch sniper on the Hayes extraction last night. I need to report something, and I need to report it outside of standard command channels. I need to know if that's something you can help me with. A brief pause. What's your current location, Sergeant? Fort Carson, my quarters. Are you alone? Yes. Stay there, Mitchell said. Don't make any other calls. Don't discuss this with anyone on base. I'll be there in 3 hours. The line went dead. Emily set the phone down and looked at the paper on her bed and the notebook beside it and the rifle case leaning against the wall, and she thought, 3 hours. A lot could happen in 3 hours. Special Agent Laura Mitchell arrived in 2 hours and 40 minutes, which told Emily something about the distance she had been keeping and the direction she had already been looking. She was a lean woman in her early 40s, dark-haired, with the kind of stillness that people develop when they spend years in rooms where showing too much too fast is a liability. She wore civilian clothes. She came alone. She sat in the single chair in Emily's quarters without being invited to, and looked at the paper in the notebook on the bed with the alert cataloging attention of someone whose job was to organize chaos into pattern. "Tell me everything," Mitchell said. "From the beginning, don't leave anything out because you think it's too small." Emily told her. She told her about the ridge and the note she'd made in the briefing room and the drone coverage parameters that had left the northeast approach unmonitored. She told her about the command voice, the direct order to stand down, the specific language about trusting the technology. She told her about the shot and the secondary position and the deviation in the extraction route. She told her about the empty landing pad and the postponed debrief and the small room used for equipment inventory. She told her about Torres and the thing he hadn't said. She told her about the paper under the door. Mitchell listened without interrupting. She was very good at listening, the particular professional quality of giving a speaker the sense that everything they said was being received and retained without judgment, without surprise. When Emily finished, Mitchell was quiet for a moment, and then she picked up the folded paper and read the 5 words and set it down again. "You were not supposed to fire," Mitchell said, repeating the words without inflection. "That's what it says." "Any idea who put it there?" "No," "But you have a thought." Emily recognized the phrase. She'd used it herself with Torres not 4 hours ago. "Someone who wanted to warn me," she said. "Someone who knew enough about the operation to know that my shot was a problem. Someone who's inside the building and knows my room number." She paused. "And someone who has enough of a conscience to want me to understand I'm in danger without being willing to say it out loud." Mitchell looked at her with something that might have been respect. "That's a precise reading. I've been thinking about it for 3 hours. Mitchell set the paper down. "Sergeant Carter, I need to ask you something, and I need you to think carefully before you answer. In the briefing room before deployment, was there any moment where you felt the mission parameters had been structured in a way that was unusual? Not tactically unusual, structurally." Emily thought about the briefing, the 45 minutes of detailed planning, the fact that her position had been placed in a location that largely duplicated drone coverage, the fact that the northeast ridge, the specific ridge, had not been mentioned despite being a natural feature that any experienced Overwatch sniper would have noted. "My position wasn't optimal," she said. "In what way?" "They put me where a standard Overwatch would go, which is also where any competent adversary would expect a sniper to be, which also meant my coverage overlapped almost entirely with the drone systems." She stopped. "I was redundant, from a tactical standpoint. If you were designing the operation for success, you would have placed me differently." Mitchell was very still. "But if you were designing the operation to have a reliable witness, or rather a reliable non-witness, you'd put me exactly where they put me," Emily finished. "Close enough to see the extraction route, far enough from the ridge that the shot would be nearly impossible. And you'd make sure the command structure was set up to dismiss anything I reported before I could report it." Mitchell stood up and walked to the window and stood there with her back to Emily for a long moment. "I've been looking at something for 6 weeks, she said without turning around. "I wasn't sure what I was looking at. I had fragments, altered surveillance data on 2 prior operations, a pattern of intelligence failures that benefited a specific set of outcomes, a communication thread that went dead every time I got close to the source." She turned. "Last night was the first time the pattern created a witness I could actually talk to." Emily absorbed this. "You were already investigating." "I was already suspicious," Mitchell corrected. "There's a difference. Suspicion is what you have when the math doesn't add up. Investigation requires evidence." She looked at Emily. "Your evidence?" "I'm a sergeant who fired without orders." "You're a sergeant who fired without orders and was right," Mitchell said, "which is considerably more useful. But it also makes you visible in a way that could be dangerous, so I need you to understand something clearly." She sat back down and leaned forward slightly, her elbows on her knees, her voice dropping. "The people who designed last night's operation are not going to accept what happened quietly. They lost their outcome, they lost their exit, and they know that the reason they lost it is you." The paper under the door, Emily said. Someone in their circle is nervous, Mitchell said. That's good for us in one way and very bad in another. It means there's a weak point. It also means that someone in that circle is communicating in ways that weren't sanctioned, which means the people running this thing are going to start tightening their circle. They're going to start removing risks. Her gaze was direct. You are currently a risk. Emily nodded slowly. The word landed without drama. Mitchell had delivered it without drama, which was part of why it landed so clearly. What do I do? Right now, nothing that looks different from what a sergeant who fired without orders would normally do. You cooperate with the command review. You answer questions honestly but without volunteering the specifics of what we've discussed. You give them nothing that tells them how much you've already figured out. Mitchell paused. And you keep that notebook somewhere that isn't your quarters. Emily looked at the notebook on the bed. Where? Somewhere you control access to. Not a locker, not a vehicle, not anywhere standard. If you have a contact outside the base. My mother, Emily said immediately. Something crossed Mitchell's face that might have been warmth if it hadn't been professional. That works, she said. Send her the notebook. Keep it in your head. She stood again, and the movement was decisive, the movement of a woman who had gathered what she needed and was already moving to the next position. I'm going to pull the full comms record from last night. The command voice you heard, I want to identify it before they have time to clean the file. Can they clean it? They can try, Mitchell said. But audio files leave traces even when people think they've been overwritten. That's something they consistently underestimate. She moved to the door and stopped with her hand on the handle. Sergeant Carter. Yeah. You trusted your eyes last night when every system in that operation told you were wrong. She held Emily's gaze. Keep doing that. Whatever they tell you about what the records show and what the protocols say and what the official version of last night is going to be, keep trusting what you saw. She left. Emily sat in the silence of her quarters and listened to Mitchell's footsteps fade down the corridor. And then she picked up the notebook and the folded paper and sat with them in her hands for a long moment. Then she got up, went to her desk, found an envelope, put the notebook inside it, sealed it, and addressed it to her mother's house in Kentucky to her own handwriting. She would mail it from off base. She would do it that afternoon on the way to the commissary in a way that looked like exactly what it was, a soldier sending something home. She put the envelope in her jacket pocket. Then she sat back on the bed and stared at the ceiling and started constructing from everything she knew and everything she had observed and everything Mitchell had said a picture of what she was actually inside. Not a mission gone slightly wrong, not a lucky save with complicated paperwork. Something much larger. Something that had been built over time by people with access and authority, and the patience to build systems within systems, and the confidence, the genuine unchecked confidence that no one at the bottom of the hierarchy was paying close enough attention to notice. The thought that settled on top of all the others, the one that sat heaviest, was this: whoever had designed last night's operation had not made a mistake in assigning her to that Overwatch position. They had made an assumption, the assumption that the woman with the old rifle whom nobody listened to, whom nobody expected to add anything to an operation bristling with modern technology, would stay in her lane. That was not a tactical error. That was arrogance. And arrogance in Emily Carter's experience was the one vulnerability that no amount of sophisticated planning could fully eliminate, because arrogance was the thing that told you there was no vulnerability to plan for. She heard footsteps in the corridor, and her body went to full alert without her consciously deciding it, the instinctive readiness that years of training had made automatic. The footsteps slowed outside her door, stopped. A knock, controlled, not aggressive. The knock of someone who expected to be admitted. Emily stood across the room and opened the door. It was a corporal she didn't know, young mid-20s, with the slightly too careful expression of someone delivering a message under observation. He handed her a printed document without speaking. She looked at it. It was a formal notice of inquiry, standard military language, dry and precise, informing Sergeant Emily Carter that she was required to appear before a command review board at 1400 hours to address her decision to discharge her weapon without authorization during the Hayes extraction operation. She looked up from the document. The corporal was already walking away. She stood in the doorway and read the document again. The language was neutral administrative, the language of procedure, not accusation. But the timing of it was not neutral. 2 hours after Mitchell left, 4 hours after a folded note appeared under her door, 7 hours after she had fired a shot that had saved a general's life and broken a plan that someone very powerful had spent a significant amount of time constructing. She thought, they're not wasting any time. She went back inside and changed into her dress uniform. If they were going to do this fast, so was she. At 1400 hours, she sat across a long table from 3 officers she had never met in a room that smelled like recycled air, an institutional carpet, and answered questions about the night before with the precision and calm of someone who had nothing to hide and nothing to apologize for. She described what she'd seen. She described her attempts to communicate the threat through proper channels. She described the command response. She described the shot. She did not mention Mitchell. She did not mention the paper under the door. She did not mention the notebook. The officer in the center, a brigadier general named Farrow, who had the kind of face that gave nothing away, as a matter of professional habit, listened to her entire account without writing anything down which Emily found noteworthy. The officer to his left took notes. The officer to his right stared at a point approximately 6 inches above Emily's head. When she finished, Farrow said, "Sergeant Carter, the drone coverage of the northeast ridge showed no contact at the time of your discharge. The hostile was positioned outside the drone's effective coverage range," Emily said. And, intentionally, Farrow repeated. "Yes, sir. You're suggesting the hostile had knowledge of our surveillance parameters." "I'm stating it," Emily said. "The positioning was not accidental. The secondary concealed position we found during the route sweep confirms it. That element was placed with the same precision. This wasn't improvised field positioning. Someone provided our coverage parameters to the hostile element in advance." The room was very quiet. Farrow looked at her for a long moment. "That's a significant claim." "It's what the evidence shows, sir." "The evidence," Farrow said, "as of this morning, consists of your personal account, 1 neutralized hostile, and 1 secondary position that has since been investigated and attributed to standard adversarial field craft." Emily kept her face neutral. "Since been investigated," she repeated. "The secondary element was assessed this morning by intelligence personnel." "Which intelligence personnel, sir?" The officer to Farrow's left stopped writing. Farrow's expression shifted barely, almost imperceptibly, but Emily had spent years watching movements that barely existed, and she saw it. "That information is not relevant to this inquiry," he said. "With respect, sir, it's directly relevant," Emily said. "If the assessment of the secondary position was conducted by intelligence personnel with access to the original mission parameters, the same parameters I'm suggesting were compromised, then the assessment itself may be compromised." Silence. Farrow looked at her with an expression that Emily could not quite read, which was unusual. He was calculating something. She could feel it, the specific quality of a person deciding how much of what they know to reveal and in which direction. "Sergeant Carter," he said finally, "this inquiry is being conducted to assess your decision to discharge your weapon without authorization. It is not at this stage a broader operational investigation." "At this stage," Emily said. "Correct. Then I'd like to formally request through this inquiry that a broader operational investigation be opened," Emily said. "Based on the evidence I've described, I'd like that request entered into the record." The officer to Farrow's right, who had been staring at the space above Emily's head for the last 20 minutes, slowly lowered his gaze to her face. He looked at her with an expression she recognized immediately and with absolute clarity. He was afraid. Not the professional, managed concern of a man facing a complicated situation. The real thing, the kind that showed up in people's faces when something they had counted on not happening had happened anyway, and they could see the consequences of it beginning to move toward them. Emily looked at him directly. She held his gaze. She did not look away. He looked down at the table. She thought, "There you are." The inquiry was recessed at 15:20 hours without a ruling. Emily was told she would receive official notification of the board's findings within 72 hours. She stood, collected her documents, and walked out of the room with the measured pace of someone going where they intend to go. In the corridor outside, she turned her phone over in her hand and sent a single text message to the number Mitchell had given her. "The officer on the right of the panel. Find out who he is." The response came back in 40 seconds. "Already have him. Don't go back to your quarters tonight." Emily read the message. "Read it again." Then she walked out of the building into the pale afternoon and found a bench in a space between two structures where she could see anyone approaching from three directions, and she sat down and thought about what Mitchell had just told her and what it meant. Don't go back to your quarters. The notebook was already in the mail to her mother. The paper under the door was in her jacket pocket. The things she knew were in her head, but the instruction meant that what was about to happen, whatever was about to happen, was moving faster than even Mitchell had expected. She sat on the bench and let the afternoon move around her and thought about a man in a room, somewhere in this building, who had looked at her face and been afraid. She thought about what he had seen there. She thought about what it meant that he had looked down first. And she thought about the voice on the comms, the voice she still couldn't put a name to, the voice that had told her the technology had the area covered, that had given her a direct order to hold her position while the plan executed itself around her. She thought about how confident that voice had been, how steady, how completely certain in that moment that she would do what she was told. She thought about her mother saying, "You think being good is the same as being careful." And she thought about the fact that careful people followed orders and good people fired when they needed to fire. And she thought about the fact that the man in that inquiry room who had looked at her and looked away had not, in his fear, looked afraid of what she might do. He had looked afraid of what she already knew, which meant they weren't ahead of her. She pulled out her phone and called her mother. "Hey, baby," her mother said, warm and immediate. "Hey, Mom." Emily kept her voice level and easy the way she kept her breathing level in a firing position. "I mailed you something, a notebook. When it arrives, I need you to keep it somewhere safe. Don't open it. Just keep it." A pause. Her mother understood more than she said always had. "Okay." "And Mom," Emily said, "if anyone calls asking about me, anyone official, anyone from the base, you just tell them you haven't spoken to me since before the deployment." "Okay." Another pause. Longer. "Emily." "I'm okay," Emily said. "I promise, I'm okay. I just need you to do that for me." Her mother breathed out slowly. "That notebook is important." "It might be," Emily said. "I don't know yet." "Then I'll keep it very safe," her mother said in the quiet, absolute tone of a woman who had raised a daughter to walk into danger and had learned to love her through it rather than around it. Emily sat on the bench until the afternoon light changed, and then she got up and went to find Mitchell. Whatever was coming, she was not going to meet it sitting still. Mitchell was staying off base, which Emily had expected, and she had left the name of the motel in the text thread, which Emily had also expected, because Mitchell was the kind of person who understood that the next move needed to happen before the people who wanted to stop it had time to anticipate it. Emily drove off base at 16:47 hours in her personal vehicle, wearing civilian clothes with nothing on her that connected her to the investigation except the folded paper in her jacket pocket and everything she knew stored in her head. She stopped at a post office on the way and mailed the envelope to Kentucky. She watched the clerk stamp it and drop it into the outgoing bin and felt something loosen slightly in her chest. Not relief exactly, but the particular release that comes from moving something irreplaceable to a safer location. She drove the rest of the way to the motel thinking about the officer who had looked down. His name, Mitchell told her when she arrived, was Colonel Dennis Pratt. 17 years of service, a decorated record in intelligence operations, 2 commendations for operational security work in classified theaters. He had been on the inquiry panel as a representative of the Army Intelligence Oversight Division, which was the division that should have been by every protocol in the book. The division investigating the compromise Mitchell had been building a case around for 6 weeks. In other words, the man sent to watch the investigation was connected to the thing being investigated. Mitchell laid this out at the small table in her motel room with 3 folders open in front of her and a coffee that had gone cold 2 hours ago sitting at her elbow. And her voice was the same careful, measured voice she always used, but there was something underneath it now, a tightness that Emily recognized as the specific tension of a person who had been working toward a conclusion they had known was bad and had just arrived at it. "Pratt has communication records," Mitchell said. "Encrypted channels. I've been tracking the metadata for 5 weeks without being able to access the content. The encryption is military grade, the kind you don't use for personal correspondence." She slid a page across the table. "The last active timestamp on those channels is 03:12 hours last night, approximately 90 minutes after the extraction team landed." Emily looked at the page. "After we came back." "After you came back," Mitchell said. After the shot, after the secondary position was found, after Hayes was alive when he was supposed to be dead. She sat back. Someone was communicating in the middle of the night through channels sophisticated enough to require military encryption, and that communication happened within 2 hours of the operation failing. Damage control, Emily said. Fast damage control, Mitchell said, which tells you how much they had prepared for the possibility that something went wrong. Emily thought about that, the idea that the people behind this had anticipated failure, had built contingencies for it. It had the communications infrastructure ready to activate the moment the outcome deviated from the plan. That was not the behavior of people acting impulsively or operating outside their competence. That was the behavior of people who had done this before. This isn't the first time, Emily said. Mitchell looked at her. You said 2 prior operations with altered surveillance data, Emily said. This isn't new. This is a system that's been running for a while. At least 14 months, Mitchell said quietly. Based on what I can verify, possibly longer. She closed one of the folders and opened another. The operations that were compromised before last night had one consistent feature. The outcomes served a specific set of interests: contracts, procurement decisions, intelligence assessments that pointed resources in particular directions. She looked up. Somebody has been running a long-term operation to steer military outcomes in ways that created financial and political advantages for a small group of people. The room was very quiet. Emily sat with it. She sat with the scale of it, the years of it, the depth of it, the number of people who would have had to be involved or complicit or deliberately looking elsewhere. She thought about all the soldiers who had gone into those prior operations, trusting the intelligence. They'd been given the surveillance parameters, the system that was supposed to be keeping them safe. Were people killed, she asked, in the prior operations? Mitchell's pause was its own answer. 2 soldiers died in a mission 14 months ago that the official investigation attributed to adverse field conditions, she said. The intelligence data for that mission showed no hostile activity in the area. 3 hours after those soldiers died, a procurement contract worth $240 million was awarded to a company with connections to the individuals I've been looking at. She paused. The contract was for new battlefield surveillance systems designed to replace aging infrastructure. Emily felt it hit her somewhere below the chest. They killed soldiers to justify buying new technology. That's what the evidence suggests, Mitchell said. It was stated with the controlled precision of an investigator who had trained herself not to let the weight of what she uncovered collapse her, but the weight was there. Emily could hear it in the half-second between each sentence. And the technology they sold, the replacement systems, had specific coverage parameters built into the design. Parameters that, if you knew them in advance, would tell you exactly where to position a hostile element to operate outside detection. Emily stood up. She couldn't sit anymore. She moved to the window and stood with her back to the room and her hands flat against her thighs and breathed. The drone coverage parameters. Try something else. The gap that the enemy sniper on the ridge had exploited with such precision. The parameters that Mitchell had just told her were built into systems sold by people connected to the individuals she was investigating. They hadn't just leaked the coverage gaps. They had designed the coverage gaps. They had sold the military a surveillance system with a blind spot, and then they had used that blind spot to conduct operations that made them richer and more powerful and left soldiers dead in mountain terrain with a procurement contract as the explanation. Mitchell, Emily said. Yeah. How far up does this go? Mitchell was quiet for 3 seconds, which was an answer. Who else knows what you know? Emily asked. Right now, Mitchell said. You, me, General Hayes. I briefed him this morning, which is why he's currently in a secure location that isn't on base. She paused. And whoever sent you that note? Emily turned from the window. The note is someone on the inside. Someone on the inside who is either experiencing a crisis of conscience or is frightened enough that warning you seemed like the safer option, Mitchell said. Either way, they know enough about the operation to know your shot broke it, which means they're close to the people running it. She looked at Emily steadily, and right now, those people are making decisions about how to contain what happened. Pratt's communications last night were the beginning of that process. The command review they scheduled for you this afternoon was part of it. They want to control the narrative around your shot before it becomes the kind of story that prompts questions they can't answer. They're going to try to discredit me, Emily said. They're going to try to make your shot the story, Mitchell said. Sergeant fires without authorization. Disobeys direct orders in the field. Creates a potential diplomatic incident by engaging a target outside confirmed parameters. That's the version they want people to hear. It makes you the problem. It makes everything you've observed a product of a soldier who was already going rogue. She paused. And it works, Emily, if we don't move faster than they do. Emily came back to the table and sat down. What do we need? I need the source of the command voice, Mitchell said. The person who gave you the stand-down order. I have a list of individuals who had command comms access during the operation, 7 people. I need to narrow it to the one who gave that specific instruction. She slid the folder across. I need you to listen to something. She opened a laptop and pressed play on an audio file. The voice that came out of the speaker was not the voice Emily remembered from the comms. It was a different voice, close but not the same. Mitchell stopped it. Not that one, Emily said immediately. Mitchell marked it and moved to the next file. They went through 4 recordings before Emily heard it. Not the words were different, a different conversation from a different briefing. But the voice was the same. The specific cadence of it, the way it handled the hard consonants, the precise and deliberate quality of it, like a man who had trained himself to speak without giving anything away. That one, Emily said. Mitchell paused the file and looked at the metadata. Her expression did something Emily hadn't seen it do before it changed completely. The professional neutral dropped and something beneath it surfaced, something that looked like it had weight. You're sure, Mitchell said. I'm sure. Who is it? Mitchell closed the laptop. She put both hands flat on the table. She looked at Emily the way a person looks at someone before they say something that is going to change the structure of every conversation that comes after it. Colonel Richard Hargrove, she said, Director of Operational Intelligence for the Western Command. Emily heard the name and felt the specific quality of a piece fitting into a place she hadn't known was waiting for it. Hargrove. She didn't know him personally. He was several levels above her in a structure that had many levels. But she knew the name the way soldiers knew the names of the people who controlled information flow. Hargrove was the kind of name that appeared on mission parameters, on intelligence assessments, on the authorization lines of classified documents. He was the kind of person who existed in the daily reality of a field soldier as an invisible authority, a name on a form, a voice on a chain of command, a voice on the comms telling her the technology had the area covered. He authorized the mission parameters, Emily said. He designed them, Mitchell said. The surveillance coverage, the overwatch placement, the comms hierarchy, all of it went through Hargrove's office. He had full access to every operational decision, including the decision about where to put you. She let that sit for a moment. He put you exactly where you'd be least effective and most isolated. And then when you saw something he needed you not to see, he was the person on the comms telling you to stand down. Emily sat with Tien. Hargrove had been running both sides. He had been the person designing the operation that was supposed to kill the general, and the person running the command structure of the operation that was supposed to extract him. The cover was perfect because if the general died, the operation was a tragedy. A mission failed under hostile conditions with Hargrove as the grieving intelligence director who had tried to bring his man home. The investigation would be controlled. The outcome would be explained. And the people who needed to profit from the chaos would have everything they needed. Until a sergeant with an old rifle and a spiral notebook had fired a shot nobody expected. He's going to run, Emily said. Mitchell shook her head. He can't run. Not yet. If he runs now, he confirms everything. His best move is to stay control the review, discredit you, and hope I can't get to the content of those encrypted communications before he finds a way to sanitize them. She looked at Emily. He doesn't know I've identified him yet. As far as Hargrove knows, this is still a situation he can manage. How long before he figures out it's not? Depends on what Pratt tells him, Mitchell said. Pratt saw you in that inquiry room. He saw you request a formal investigation on record. He knows you're not going to be quiet. She paused. He's going to report that to Hargrove tonight. Then tonight is the window, Emily said. Tonight is the window, Mitchell agreed. They sat in the silence of the motel room with that understanding between them. The specific charged understanding of 2 people who have located the edge of the time they have to work with and know that everything from this point on happens at a different pace. I need to get to the encrypted communications, Mitchell said. The content. With Hargrove identified as the command voice, I can get a judicial authorization for the decryption. That's the legal mechanism. But authorization takes time, and if Hargrove sanitizes those files before I get access, we lose the most direct evidence. How much time? Authorization minimum 6 hours. Realistically, with the level of classification involved, 12 to 14. Emily thought. What about Hayes? Hayes is secure, but I can't use him publicly until I have something more than a sergeant's testimony and metadata. If I bring him into this now, they'll put him in a box, medical evaluation, security review, something that sidelines him while they contain the situation. Mitchell's jaw tightened slightly. Hayes knows things. He knows operational history with Hargrove that could corroborate the pattern. But I need him safe and available, not neutralized. So we need something else, Emily said. Something that doesn't require 14 hours. Something that doesn't require Hargrove to leave his files intact long enough for a court order to reach them, Mitchell said. She looked at Emily. The person who sent you that note. Emily looked back at her. If that person is close enough to know your shot, broke the plan, Mitchell said, they might be close enough to have access to communications they shouldn't officially have, or documents, or records that weren't meant to survive the morning. She paused. Someone in Hargrove's circle went to your door in the middle of the night and told you that you weren't supposed to fire. That person is carrying something they can't put down. And right now, with Pratt reporting to Hargrove and the window closing, that person is going to be more frightened than they were when they slid that note under your door. Frightened people make decisions, Emily said. Frightened people make decisions, Mitchell repeated. The question is whether they make the right one. Emily thought about the note. 5 words, block letters, no signature. She thought about what it cost someone to walk to that door in the middle of the night in a building full of soldiers and slide a piece of paper under the door of the person who had just broken the plan they were part of. She thought about what was sitting underneath that decision. Not courage exactly, or not only courage, but the specific weight of a person who had watched something go wrong and couldn't entirely make themselves look away. I might know who it is, Emily said. Mitchell was still. Who? Emily thought about Torres. The way he had slowed in the corridor. The way he had said the shot that changed everything with a different voice than the one he'd used to dismiss her rifle. The way he had looked at her when she said Torres knows something. The way he had walked away without answering her question about the command comms. Torres, she said, Sergeant First Class Torres. He was on the extraction team. What makes you think it was him? He was scared, Emily said. Not after the mission, before I told him anything. He already knew something was wrong before he had anything specific to be scared of. And when I asked him who was on the command comms, he didn't say he didn't know. He said he didn't know for certain. She paused. For certain, like he had a strong suspicion he was afraid to name. Mitchell was already writing. Where is Torres now? Quarters, probably. They sent us all to quarters after the postponed debrief. Can you reach him? Emily thought about it. Reaching Torres through official channels, phone-based comms, created a record. Hargrove's people would have access to those records, or would have access soon. Going to Torres in person inside the base was better but still visible. She needed a way to reach him that was clean. He smokes, Emily said. Dumb. Every morning 6:15 behind the motor pool. It's not a scheduled thing, it's just a habit. The kind of habit a person keeps because it's the only time they have alone. Mitchell looked at her. You noticed that? I notice habits, Emily said. It's what I do. Okay, Mitchell said. 6:15 is 11 hours from now. That's too long. She thought for a moment. Is there anywhere on base you could run into him naturally? A dining facility, a common space? There's a gym, Emily said. Building 12. Torres is there most evenings around 2000 hours. He has the kind of build that doesn't happen without daily maintenance. That's 45 minutes from now, Mitchell said. Can you get back on base without it looking like you've been anywhere? I went off base for dinner, Emily said flatly. That's all. Mitchell almost smiled. Go, she said. Don't mention my name. Don't mention Hargrove's name. Don't tell him what you have. Just find out what he's carrying. And if he's willing to give it to you, bring it back here. Emily stood. She was already calculating the drive back, the time, the way she would enter the gym, and what she would say. She was doing what she always did before a shot, building the sequence in her head, running through it until the steps were clean. Mitchell, she said. Yeah. If Pratt reports to Hargrove tonight, And Hargrove decides that the fastest way to manage this isn't to discredit me. What does he do? The question sat in the air between them. Mitchell answered it without pretending she hadn't understood it. He removes the problem, Mitchell said quietly. That's what he's been doing for 14 months. Emily nodded. She didn't ask the follow-up question out loud because she didn't need to. She was the problem now. She had been the problem since 0247 hours on the ridge when she'd pulled the trigger and broken the plan, and everything that had happened since the inquiry. The paper under the door, Pratt at the table looking afraid, was the machinery of a very powerful man deciding how to handle a problem he hadn't planned for. She drove back to Fort Carson in the dark, thinking about the 2 soldiers who had died 14 months ago, in the procurement contract, in the surveillance system with the designed-in blind spot, and she felt the anger of it clean and cold, the kind of anger that doesn't have anywhere to put itself, that just has to be carried. She signed back onto base at 1918 hours and walked to Building 12. Torres was there. She found him on a machine with his back to the door, working through repetitions with the focused, rhythmic energy of someone trying to exhaust a thought rather than a muscle. She waited until he hit the natural pause at the end of a set, and then she sat down on the bench beside him. He looked at her. His expression was a complicated thing, the relief of a person who has been waiting for a conversation and the fear of a person who has been dreading it, both present at the same time. Carter, he said. Torres, she said. A pause. He picked up a towel and ran it over his face, which was the gesture of a man buying time. You came back to base, he said. I came back to base, she confirmed. I thought maybe you'd... He stopped. I don't know what I thought. Torres, Emily said, and her voice was quiet the way it was quiet when she was in a firing position. Not soft, not gentle, but stripped of everything that wasn't necessary. I know it was you. He went very still. The towel stopped moving. His hands were flat on his knees, and he stared at the floor between his feet, and the silence around them in the gym was the specific kind of silence that only existed for the 2 of them. You can't know that, he said. His voice was rough. I've been watching people for a long time, Emily said. The way you looked at me in the corridor this morning. The way you walked away when I asked you about the command comms. The specific way you said for certain. She paused. You knew something was wrong with the operation before we deployed, didn't you? Torres's jaw tightened. He breathed out through his nose. Torres, 2 soldiers died 14 months ago. That's where this started, and it didn't stop there. He looked up at her. His eyes were the eyes of a man who had been carrying something for a long time and had reached the point where the carrying had become more dangerous than the setting down. I didn't know about the soldiers, he said. I swear I didn't know that. What did you know? Another silence. Longer. Emily waited. She was very good at waiting. There was a briefing, Torres said finally, 3 weeks before this mission. An informal one, not official, not on record. Hargrove's office, a small group. I was there because I was being considered for the extraction team lead. His hands tightened on the towel. Hargrove laid out the operation, the parameters, the coverage, the overwatch placement. And someone asked about the Northeast Ridge. The specific ridge Carter and Hargrove said it had been assessed and cleared. He stopped. But, Emily said, but the way he said it, Torres said, it wasn't the way you say something that's true. It was the way you say something you want to be true. And I looked at the map and I thought, he shook his head. I thought I was wrong. I told myself I was wrong. Hargrove has 17 years. The man has more commendations than I have years in service. I'm a sergeant first class who looks at a map and has a feeling, and I'm supposed to contradict the director of operational intelligence. But you couldn't let it go, Emily said. I watched you in that briefing room, Torres said. I watched you looking at that map and writing in your notebook, and I knew you saw the same thing I saw. And I made a choice. He looked at her, and the weight of the choice was in his face. I told myself you'd raise it if it was real. I told myself you'd say something. I did say something, Emily said. I know, Torres said, and I heard the command voice tell you to stand down. And I kept moving. I followed the protocol, and I kept moving toward the extraction point. And I knew in that moment, Carter, I knew what I was doing, and I did it anyway because the protocol said to do it, and Hargrove was on the comms, and 17 years, his voice broke slightly, steadied. And then I heard your shot. Emily looked at him. The shot was loud, he said. Not the sound I've heard rifle fire before. The situation was loud. The fact of it. You fired when you were ordered not to fire, and I felt it hit me like. He stopped. And then we found the secondary position, and the general was alive. And I stood there thinking about everything I had not said in the last 3 weeks, and I thought somebody needs to know. The note, Emily said. I didn't sign it, Torres said with the ghost of something that wasn't quite a smile. I know that was. It was enough, Emily said. It pointed me in the right direction. That's all I needed. She looked at him steadily. Torres, I need to know if you have anything else. Anything from that informal briefing, anything Hargrove said or showed you any documentation. Torres was quiet for a moment. Then he reached into the pocket of his jacket, which was folded on the bench beside him, and pulled out a small folded piece of paper. He held it for a moment, looking at it. I took a photo, he said, of the map at the briefing. The one Hargrove showed us with the surveillance parameters marked. I took it on my phone because I didn't have my notebook and I thought I might want to reference it later. He looked up at Emily. It's a photo of a classified map, which means I shouldn't have it, and I definitely shouldn't be showing it to anyone. But it shows the coverage parameters as Hargrove drew them. And the northeast ridge is outside the coverage zone, Emily said. Marked as cleared, Torres said. Not as outside coverage. Marked as cleared, but by Hargrove's hand on a map that was supposed to show us the truth about what we were walking into. Emily looked at the folded paper. It was his phone number, she realized, written on the paper, not the photo itself. He had put his phone number on a piece of paper and carried it, waiting for the moment when he was ready to give it to someone. You can pull the photo from his phone, she said, meaning Mitchell, not saying Mitchell. Whoever needs it, Torres said. Yes. He held the paper out. Emily took it. She held it between 2 fingers and looked at him and thought about the weight of what he'd just done, the irrevocability of it, the way that passing that piece of paper across between them had shifted something that couldn't be shifted back. You know what this means, she said. Yeah, Torres said. I know what it means. Are you okay with that? He looked at her for a long moment. He looked like a man who had made peace with a decision that cost him something significant, not easily, not without knowing exactly what the cost was, but genuinely and without performance. 2 soldiers died, he said, and I kept moving. So, he stood up. Yeah, I'm okay with it. Emily stood too. She put the piece of paper in her pocket. Stay visible tonight, she said. On base public spaces with people around you. Don't go anywhere isolated. Don't answer calls from numbers you don't recognize. If anything feels wrong, your gut, not your head, your gut, you call me. Torres looked at her. You think they'll move tonight? I think they're deciding right now whether to, Emily said. And I think the next few hours are going to determine which way that goes. Torres nodded. He picked up his jacket. He looked like a different person than the man who had asked her what exactly a bolt-action sniper was going to add to an elite operation. He looked like a man who had been carrying something too heavy for too long and had finally found someone to help him carry it. Carter, he said. Yeah. I'm sorry, he said. About the rifle thing, about what I said. You already apologized for that, Emily said. I know, I just wanted to say it again. He paused. For what it's worth, I don't think it's outdated. I think it's exactly the right tool for someone who knows how to use it. He looked at her. You're the right tool for this. Emily almost said something. Then she decided the moment didn't need more words from either of them. She walked out of the gym into the dark Colorado night and took out her phone and sent Mitchell a 3-word message. I have it. Mitchell's response came back in under 30 seconds. Come now. Hargrove just activated his emergency communications protocol. We have maybe 4 hours. Emily was already moving. Behind her inside the gym, she heard Torres settle back onto the machine and begin his repetitions again, working through the exhaustion of something that was more than muscle, counting out each rep with the steady rhythm of a man who had finally decided what he was going to do and was burning through the fear of it one breath at a time. Emily was back at the motel by 203 hours, and Mitchell had the door open before she knocked, which meant she'd been watching from the window, and the tension in the room had been building while Emily was driving. The folder situation on the table had doubled since Emily left 2 more files, a laptop open, to what looked like a communication log and a yellow legal pad covered in Mitchell's handwriting, tight and fast, and going in 3 directions at once, like the thoughts of someone running out of time and refusing to slow down. Torres has a photo, Emily said and handed over the piece of paper with his number. Mitchell looked at it. She picked up her phone immediately and sent a text. I need him to send it right now, not in the morning. She set the phone down. Hargrove activated an emergency communications protocol at 1847 hours. Military-grade encryption scrambled routing. The kind you activate when you're about to do something you want completely off the record. Pratt reported in, Emily said. Pratt reported in, Mitchell confirmed, and whatever he told Hargrove, Hargrove did not like it. She turned the laptop to face Emily. Look at this. The screen showed a timeline, timestamps, file, access logs, system entries. Emily looked at the bottom of the list, the most recent entries, and felt the cold clarity of understanding arrive without ceremony. At 1851 hours, 4 minutes after the emergency communications protocol was activated, someone had accessed the archived mission files from the Hayes extraction, not to read them, to modify them. He's changing the records, Emily said. He's trying to, Mitchell said. The access was logged automatically, that's standard. What he didn't account for is that I already have a mirrored copy of the original files from this morning timestamped and hash verified, which means any modification he makes now creates a discrepancy that's legally demonstrable. She paused. But I need that photo from Torres before Hargrove finishes what he's doing. Because if he sanitizes those mission records and I can't access the encrypted communications through a court order in time, the photo is what links the original coverage parameters to Hargrove's hand. It's the bridge. Emily's phone buzzed. A text from Torres, a number she'd memorized from the paper before giving it to Mitchell. She turned the phone toward Mitchell without speaking. Torres had sent the photo. Mitchell opened it on her laptop and expanded it and looked at it for approximately 5 seconds and then said quietly with the particular quality of someone who has just received the confirmation of something they needed very badly to be confirmed. There it is. The photo was slightly off-angle, taken quickly the way you take something when you're not certain you should be taking it. But the map was clear enough. The coverage parameters were marked in red. The northeast ridge, the exact ridge, the specific coordinates that Emily had noted in her spiral notebook during the briefing, that the drone systems had not covered, that the enemy sniper had used with such precise, specific, informed accuracy, was inside a circle marked in Hargrove's handwriting with a single word, cleared, Emily said. He told the team what he needed them to believe, Mitchell said. And then he designed the surveillance parameters to make sure nobody could independently verify it. She sat back. This map was shown at an informal briefing 3 weeks before deployment. It was never entered into the official record. Nobody was supposed to remember it with enough specificity to contradict the official version. She looked at Emily. Except Torres had his phone. And Torres had a conscience that kept him awake at night, Emily said. Mitchell's phone buzzed. She looked at it, and her expression changed, not dramatically, but enough for Emily to read it as the arrival of something significant. That's my supervisor, Mitchell said. He's been in contact with the Department of Defense Office of Inspector General. She answered immediately. Mitchell. A pause. She listened. Her face went through several adjustments in quick succession, focused surprise, a hard settling of something. When? Another pause. Understood. We'll be ready. She ended the call. Emily waited. The OIG had an ongoing investigation, Mitchell said, separate from mine. They've been looking at the procurement angle of the $240 million contract, the company connections. They've had it for 8 months. She looked at Emily. They were 30 days from a formal referral when the Hayes operation happened. Hargrove's name is in their files, but until last night, they didn't have an operational incident they could connect directly to his actions. She paused. They do now. You are now a named witness in a Department of Defense Inspector General investigation. The rooms seemed to shift slightly around that sentence, the way rooms did when the scale of something changed. They're moving tonight, Emily asked. They want to move before Hargrove finishes sanitizing those records, Mitchell said. My supervisor is coordinating with the OIG right now. We have a window, maybe 2 hours before Hargrove either disappears what he needs to disappear or makes a decision to do something more immediate. She stood. I need you to put everything you know into a formal written statement. Everything from the briefing room to right now. Every observation, every conversation, every detail. Timestamps where you have them. She pushed the legal pad and a pen across the table. Fast but thorough. Can you do that? Yes, Emily said and pulled the pad toward her and started writing. She wrote for 41 minutes without stopping. The statement was 6 pages of compressed, precise chronological account of the briefing room, the ridge, the shot, the note under the door, the inquiry panel, Pratt's face, Mitchell's motel room, Torres in the gym, the photo. She did not editorialize. She did not explain her feelings about any of it. She wrote what she had observed and what she had concluded, and she kept the two categories clearly separate because she had been trained to know that the difference between observation and conclusion was the difference between evidence and noise. When she was done, she pushed the pad back to Mitchell, who read it in 7 minutes and made 2 small notes in the margin. "This is good," Mitchell said. "This is very good." She picked up her phone. "I'm going to send a digital version to the OIG right now. Your statement combined with Torres's photo, combined with the file access log I already have. This is enough to initiate a formal arrest and secure the remaining evidence before Hargrove can touch it." Emily sat back. Her hand was aching from the speed of the writing, and she pressed it flat against the table and felt the small pain of it and thought briefly and irrationally about her mother. "Hayes needs to know," she said. "Hayes has been briefed," Mitchell said. "He's been ready since this morning. The minute I signal him, he's available to provide a formal statement about his operational history with Hargrove, the pattern of intelligence anomalies he'd noticed over the past year, the concerns he'd raised internally that were consistently redirected or buried." She paused. "Hayes noticed things too. He just didn't have what you have." "He didn't have a ridge," Emily said. "He didn't have a ridge," Mitchell agreed. "He had a feeling and a pattern. You have a confirmed operational incident with a named witness, a physical piece of evidence, and a voice print on a comms record." She looked at Emily. "You gave us the incident that made everything else provable." At 20:05 1 hours, Mitchell's phone rang. She answered it, listened for approximately 20 seconds, and said, "Authorize it. We're ready on this end." She hung up. "What just happened?" Emily said. "The OIG issued an emergency authorization," Mitchell said. "Federal agents are moving on Hargrove's office right now to secure the files before any further modifications can be made." She stood up and started moving with the efficient speed of someone transitioning from preparation to execution. "Pratt is being detained for questioning. The 2 communication operatives who handled the encrypted channel overnight are being brought in." She grabbed her jacket. "And there's one more thing." "What?" "There's a second location," that Mitchell said. "The financial beneficiary, the primary individual who profited from the procurement contract, the person Hargrove was coordinating with externally. The OIG has been building that case separately. Tonight they move on both simultaneously." She paused. "If either one knows the other is being taken, they'll activate contingencies. So it has to happen at the same time." Emily understood. The structure of it, the operational elegance of a simultaneous takedown, was clean in the way that good plans were clean, the way a well-placed shot was clean. Not complicated, not elaborate, precise. "What do I do?" Emily said. "Right now, you stay here, you stay safe, and you answer your phone when they call for your statement." Mitchell looked at her with the direct, uncomplicated attention of a person who respected what was in front of them. "Emily, you've already done the hard part. You fired the shot. You saw what they needed you not to see. You didn't go quiet when going quiet was the easier choice." She paused. "The rest of this is machinery. Let the machinery work." Emily sat with that. She thought she understood what Mitchell was doing, giving her the permission to rest, to hand off the weight she'd been carrying since the ridge. She appreciated it. She also knew herself well enough to know that she was not going to sit in a motel room while the machinery worked, because the machinery was only working because of the things she'd seen and the things she'd done, and she needed to know how it came out. "I'll stay here," she said. Mitchell gave her a look that said she didn't entirely believe that. "Good," she said, and went out the door. The next 2 hours were the hardest Emily had experienced in a long time, and she had experienced some hard hours. She sat at the small table with her cold coffee and her empty legal pad, and the timeline playing itself forward and backward in her head, and she did what she always did when she was waiting in a position without clear action. She made herself very still, and she watched the room, and she thought. She thought about Hargrove, about the voice on the comms, the steadiness of it, the complete and untroubled certainty of a man in full control of a situation he had designed. She thought about what that kind of certainty required, the scaffolding underneath it, The years of building the incremental decisions, each one a little worse than the one before, each one made a little easier by the success of the last. Nobody woke up one morning and decided to kill soldiers and sell surveillance systems and assassinate generals. They woke up one morning and made one small compromise and then another. And then one day the compromises had accumulated into something so large that the only way to protect it was to keep building, keep hiding, keep deciding that the next thing was necessary because all the previous things had already been done. She thought about Torres doing repetitions in the gym to burn through his fear. She thought about the 2 soldiers who had died 14 months ago in mountain terrain with no hostile contact confirmed by surveillance. She thought about their families and about what those families had been told, and about the word adverse field conditions sitting at the bottom of an official report like a stone over something that deserved better. At 22:14 hours, her phone rang. Unknown number. She answered immediately. Carter, Sergeant Carter. A voice she didn't recognize, Mayo careful, the bureaucratic authority of someone who dealt in official processes. This is Special Investigator Donovan from the Department of Defense Office of Inspector General. I'm calling to inform you that at 21:47 hours this evening, Colonel Richard Hargrove was taken into federal custody at his residence. The premises have been secured and all relevant communications and documentation are currently being processed by our evidence team. Emily sat very still. Colonel Dennis Pratt is in custody as well, Donovan continued, and the external financial party connected to this investigation has been detained simultaneously by FBI agents at a separate location. All 3 are currently in federal holding, pending formal charges. A brief pause. I wanted to personally inform you of this because your statement and the evidence you provided were instrumental in achieving tonight's result. Your account directly enabled the emergency authorization that allowed us to move before evidence could be destroyed. Emily found she didn't have words immediately. She sat in the silence of the motel room with the phone against her ear and the weight of the last 36 hours pressing in all directions at once. Sergeant Carter, Donovan said. I'm here, she said. Thank you for calling. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. There will be a formal process from here, Donovan said. You'll be contacted about your official testimony. General Hayes has been notified and is ready to cooperate fully. Special Agent Mitchell will be your primary point of contact as the investigation moves into its formal phase. He paused. Is there anything you need right now? Emily almost laughed. Not because anything was funny, but because the question was so large and so ordinary at the same time, and after 36 hours of operating inside a threat that had been trying to close around her, the idea that someone was asking if she needed anything felt both absurd and deeply human. I'm okay, she said. I'm fine, thank you. She hung up. She sat there for a while, then she called Torres. He answered on the second ring. Carter. His voice was very quiet. They have him, she said. Hargrove's in custody. Pratt, too. The financial side as well. A long silence on Torres' end. She heard him breathing. She heard underneath the breathing the sound of a man experiencing the specific release of something that had been held too tightly for too long. The 2 soldiers, Torres said finally. It won't bring them back, Emily said. But it won't be buried anymore either. Another silence. Okay, Torres said. He said it the way people said things when words were insufficient, and they said them anyway because the alternative was silence. Okay? You did the right thing, Emily said. I know it cost you. You did the right thing first, Torres said, on the ridge when they told you not to. Emily thought about that for a moment, about the ridge and the scope and the figure that had been preparing to fire, and the order she had been given to hold her position, and the choice she had made in the 4 seconds between receiving that order and pulling the trigger. She thought about how much of what had happened since the note, the inquiry, Mitchell Torres, the photo, the statement, the simultaneous takedown had flowed directly from that one moment. One shot, not a perfect shot, a necessary one. Get some sleep, Torres, she said. Yeah, he said. You too. She hung up and sat in the dark of the motel room and allowed herself for the first time since the ridge to feel the full exhaustion of it. It hit her the way exhaustion hit after adrenaline, not gradually but all at once, like a wave arriving after you've already walked inland and thought you were safe. She lay back on the motel bed fully dressed and stared at the ceiling and thought about calling her mother and then didn't because it was after 10 o'clock and her mother was asleep and the notebook was safe in Kentucky and the people who had needed to be stopped had been stopped, and none of the rest needed to be said tonight. What she thought about lying there in the dark was Hargrove. Not with hatred, not with satisfaction, with the specific, serious attention she gave to things she needed to understand. She thought about the moment he had typed those 4 words in the secure communications room, "Let the general fall," and the steadiness his hands must have had. The absolute certainty, the complete architecture of confidence in the plan he had built. She thought about the 17 years, the commendations, the authority, the access. She thought about what it was that made a person believe in the deep structure of their thinking, that they were beyond consequence. She thought it was probably the years of not facing any, every compromise that succeeded, every scheme that paid off, every situation that was contained, and every voice that was silenced, and every outcome that was controlled. Each success building the foundation for a larger certainty until the certainty was so total that the man in the secure communications room typing those 4 words didn't feel the weight of them at all. He had not planned for a sergeant with an old rifle and a spiral notebook. He had not planned for a soldier who watched instead of seeing what she was told to see. He had not planned for Torres in a briefing room 3 weeks before deployment, taking a quick photo on his phone because he had a feeling he couldn't name yet. He had not planned for the specific and irreducible fact that people, even people, he was certain he had accounted for or contained things he could not calculate. Conscience, instinct, the particular human capacity to see something wrong and be unable to entirely look away from it. Those were not variables his system had made room for. That was the thing that brought it down. At 23:18 hours, her phone buzzed again. A text from Mitchell. "I'm coming back to the motel. We need to talk about what comes next. Get some rest first if you can." "You've earned it." Emily stared at the message for a moment. Then she typed back, "How is Hayes?" The response came quickly. "He wants to meet you. He has something he wants to say in person." Emily looked at the ceiling again. She thought about General Hayes, a name on a mission briefing, a person she had seen only through a scope at a distance, a man whose life had been the center of everything that had happened for the last 36 hours and whom she had never actually spoken to. She typed, "Tell him I'll be there." Then she closed her eyes. She didn't plan to sleep. Her body had other ideas the way bodies did when they had been running on will and adrenaline and had finally been given permission to stop. She slept for 3 hours and 40 minutes, and she didn't dream. And when she woke up, the room was gray with early light coming through the gap in the curtains. For a moment, she lay there and simply experienced the strangeness of the morning, the ordinary quiet of it, the fact that the thing she had been moving toward for 36 hours had arrived and resolved, and now the world had the slightly unfamiliar texture of aftermath, of a situation that was changed, of a shape that was different from the one it had been. Then she got up, splashed water on her face, and sat down at the table. Mitchell arrived at 0641 hours, and she was different in a specific way, not lighter exactly because what they were dealing with was not light, but straighter, like a person who had been carrying something at an angle and had finally found a level surface to set it on. She had a coffee in each hand, and she put one in front of Emily without asking and sat down. "Hargrove lawyered up immediately," Mitchell said, "which is what people do when they know exactly what they're facing. His attorneys are going to try to build a firewall between him and the financial side claim he was acting in good faith on bad intelligence, that the coverage gaps were genuine failures rather than designed features." She wrapped both hands around her coffee. "It's not going to work. The photo your voice print ID of the comms recording the file modification logs from last night, the OIG's 8 months of financial documentation, there are too many angles. Any one of them could theoretically be disputed. Together, they're airtight. The 2 soldiers," Emily said, "the ones from 14 months ago, will that be part of the charges?" "That's going to be the most complex part legally," Mitchell said carefully. "Proving that the intelligence failure was deliberate, that it was designed to create conditions where those soldiers would be exposed rather than a genuine operational error. We're going to have to build that case carefully." She paused. "But yes, that's the intent. Those 2 soldiers, their families, they deserve a real accounting, not adverse field conditions." Emily said nothing. She drank her coffee. "Pratt is talking," Mitchell said. "He asked for a deal in exchange for full cooperation at 3 o'clock this morning. Our investigators are with him right now. He's been part of Hargrove's network for 6 years. She paused. "He's the one who sent you the note, by the way." Emily looked up. "Pratt," Mitchell said. "He slid the note under your door. He was on his way to report the inquiry panel results to Hargrove when he passed your corridor, and something he says he doesn't know exactly what, just that he saw the number on your door and thought about the shot on the ridge. Something made him stop. He had a piece of paper and a pen in his pocket. He wrote 5 words and put it under your door and walked away. Emily absorbed this. Dennis Pratt, the man who had looked down at the table during the inquiry, the man whose fears she had read so clearly, she had thought, there you are. He was afraid, Emily said. He'd been afraid for a long time, Mitchell said. That's what he's telling the investigators. He got into it gradually, one favor, one look, the other way, and then one day the things he'd done were large enough that Hargrove owned him, and that's how it works. She paused. But when he sat across from you in that inquiry room and watched you request a formal investigation on record, watched you be exactly as immovable as you were, something shifted for him. He said it was the way you looked at him. Emily sat quietly with that. You did that, Mitchell said. Not just the shot, the inquiry, the request on record, the way you held yourself in that room. You made Pratt decide that the side he was on was the losing side and, more importantly, the wrong side. And that decision is what's going to make the case against Hargrove complete. Emily picked up her coffee and held it and thought about ripples. About the way a single moment propagated outward, the shot on the ridge that broke the plan, the note under the door, the inquiry room, Torres in the gym, the photo on the phone, Mitchell's laptop, Donovan's voice on the phone at 22:14 hours. All of it connected, all of it flowing from one decision made on a ridge in 4 seconds with a rifle that everybody thought was outdated. What happens to me? She said. It was a practical question. She asked it that way. Formally, Mitchell said, the unauthorized discharge charge goes away. The command review is being reassigned outside Hargrove's chain of influence. That chain no longer exists. Your account is part of the official OIG record. She paused. Informally, you're going to have some difficult conversations with people who preferred a world where the inquiry board could make a quiet ruling and everyone moved on. There are going to be people in the Army who are uncomfortable with what this investigation reveals because it reveals failures they were responsible for noticing and didn't. She met Emily's eyes. That's not going to be comfortable for you. I wasn't comfortable already, Emily said. No, Mitchell said. I know. A pause settled between them, the particular pause of 2 people who had moved through something difficult together and arrived at the other side of it and were learning in real time what the other side felt like. Hayes wants to meet you today, Mitchell said. He's at a secure facility 20 minutes from here. He was very specific that he wanted to speak with you in person, not through a statement or a representative. She looked at Emily. He knows the full picture now. He knows it was designed to kill him. He knows about the soldiers. He knows about the 14 months. She paused. And he knows that you're the reason he's alive to know any of it. Emily thought about the general she had watched through a scope on a mountain. The figure moving toward the extraction point, unaware of the figure on the ridge preparing to fire, unaware of the voice on the comms that had told the one person who could stop it to hold her position. She had not thought of him as a general in that moment. She had thought of him as a person who was about to die for reasons he didn't understand. I'll go, she said. They drove to the secure facility in Mitchell's car, and Emily sat in the passenger seat watching Colorado roll past in the early morning light, and she felt the strangeness of the world on the other side of something. The ordinary texture of roads and buildings and sky that were exactly the same as they had always been, and yet contained underneath the sameness, the knowledge that something had changed. She thought about her notebook in Kentucky sitting in her mother's house. She would ask for it back eventually. She didn't need it as evidence anymore. Mitchell had photographed every page before Emily mailed it. But she wanted it back because it was hers. The notes she had made in the briefing room, the ridge coordinates, the small observations that had turned out to be more than small. She wanted to have it in the way you wanted to keep the things that had mattered. At 07:49 hours, they pulled into the parking area of a low building with the nondescript exterior of a place designed not to attract attention. A soldier Emily didn't know checked their credentials and waved them through. General William Hayes was waiting in a conference room, sitting at the near end of a table with a cup of coffee going cold beside him, and he stood when Emily came through the door. He was older than she had expected from the briefing materials, not elderly, but carrying age the way soldiers did, as something that arrived in the specific places the years had pushed on. He had the kind of face that suggested he had always been direct, and time had made him more so. He looked at her for a moment. Then he said, "I've been trying to figure out what to say to you since about 6 this morning." Emily stood across the table from him. "Sir." "Sit down, Sergeant," he said. "Please." He sat down as himself, and Emily sat, and for a moment they simply looked at each other with the uncomplicated directness of two people who had been connected by an event neither of them had fully processed yet. "Mitchell briefed me on everything," Hayes said. "The briefing room, the ridge, the inquiry, Pratt Torres, all of it." He was quiet for a moment. "I want to be very clear about something. What you did on that ridge disobeying a direct order was technically insubordinate. I'm not going to pretend otherwise, because you know that, and I know that, and neither of us is served by pretending." Emily held his gaze. "Yes, sir." "And if you had not done it," Hayes said, "I would be dead, and the 14 months of what Hargrove built would have continued, and the 2 soldiers we lost last year would have company." He let that sit. "So I want to say directly, because I believe in saying things directly, you were right to fire. Your judgment was correct when every system in that operation was telling you it wasn't. And I don't take lightly what it costs a soldier to trust their instincts over a direct order from command." Emily was quiet. She did not know exactly what to do with the weight of what he was saying, so she held it and let it settle. "I'm going to make sure the record reflects what actually happened on that ridge," Hayes said. "Not a version that's comfortable for anyone, but the accurate version. You identified a threat that was deliberately designed to be invisible to our systems. You communicated it through proper channels, were overruled without justification, and then acted on confirmed observation to prevent the death of a commanding officer." He paused. "That's not insubordination. That's the best possible execution of what a soldier is actually for." Emily felt something give slightly, not break, just yield. She was not a person who showed emotion easily in professional contexts. She had spent years learning to keep the things she felt in their appropriate containers. But the general's directness had a quality that made the containers less necessary than usual, and she let a small, genuine thing show in her face. "Thank you, sir," she said. "Thank you, Sergeant," Hayes said. He leaned forward slightly. "I have one question for you, and you don't have to answer it if you'd rather not." Emily waited. When the order came to stand down," Hayes said, "when Hargrove told you the technology had the area covered and you were to hold your position, how certain were you?" Emily thought about it. The scope, the ridge, the figure preparing to fire the 45 seconds, the wind at 9 knots trending left. "Certain enough," she said. Hayes looked at her for a long moment. "Certain enough," he repeated. "Not certain I was right," Emily clarified. "Certain enough that being wrong was a risk I was willing to live with. And being right and not acting was a risk I wasn't." Hayes sat back. He nodded slowly, the way a person nodded when they had received an answer that told them something more than the words themselves. "That," he said quietly, "is exactly the kind of soldier we need more of." Emily didn't answer that. There wasn't anything to answer. She just held the moment and let it be what it was. Outside the conference room, somewhere in the building, a phone was ringing. Someone was moving through a corridor with quick steps. The world was doing what it always did, running processing, moving toward the next thing. The investigation would continue for months. The legal proceedings would be complex and contested and slow. There would be testimony and documentation and the long grinding machinery of accountability that was never as clean or as fast as the moment that set it in motion. But in the conference room for a few more seconds, it was just 2 soldiers sitting across the table from each other, and the quiet that was between them was not the uncomfortable kind, not the kind that needed to be filled. It was the kind that came after something true had been said. And both of them knew what it felt like, so neither of them rushed to end it. The weeks that followed Hargrove's arrest were not quiet. Emily had not expected them to be quiet. She had known from the moment Donovan called at 22 of 14 hours to tell her it was done. That done was not actually done in the way that word implied. Done was the beginning of a different kind of work, slower and less legible than anything she was trained for, conducted in conference rooms and legal offices, in formal testimony sessions, rather than on ridges and in mountain terrain, and requiring a different kind of steadiness than the kind she was used to providing. The Army moved fast once it moved. That surprised her slightly. She had expected institutional resistance, the defensive crouch of an organization protecting its reputation. What she found instead was that Hargrove's network, once exposed, generated its own momentum toward accountability, because the people who had been adjacent to it and not quite part of it had spent years being quietly uncomfortable, and were now with the protection of an OIG investigation to stand behind willing to say so out loud. Pratt's cooperation opened 6 additional names. 3 of those names opened 4 more. The financial structure behind the procurement contract, the $240 million award that had followed the deaths of 2 soldiers in mountain terrain, unraveled with the specific logic of a thing that had always been held together by the assumption that nobody would pull the thread. The company, the board members, the intermediaries, the offshore accounts that appeared in documentation nobody had looked at because nobody had thought to look. The OIG called Emily in for formal testimony at 0900 hours on a Tuesday, 8 days after the arrest, and she sat in a federal building in Colorado Springs for 4 hours and answered every question with the precision and calm she had been practicing her entire career. And when it was over, she walked out into the afternoon and sat in her car and allowed herself briefly and completely to be tired. Not defeated, not broken, just tired in the honest way of a person who has carried something real for a significant distance and has finally set it down in the right place. She called her mother. The notebook, her mother said immediately without preamble. "You want it back?" "I want it back," Emily confirmed. "It's on its way," her mother said. "I mailed it this morning. I had a feeling." A pause. "Baby." "Yeah. Are you okay?" And I want the real answer, not the soldier answer. Emily sat with her hands on the steering wheel and thought about the real answer. She thought about the ridge in the shot and the note under the door, and Pratt looking down at the table, and Torres in the gym, and Mitchell at the motel table, and Hayes across the conference room saying that is exactly the kind of soldier we need more of. She thought about the 2 soldiers she had never met who had died 14 months ago in conditions that were constructed around them, and about their families and about the word adverse used as a burial stone. "I'm okay," she said. "The real answer is I'm okay. I'm tired and I'm okay." Her mother was quiet for a moment. "Then I'm going to tell you something." "Okay." "I have been scared for you every day since you joined the Army," her mother said. "Every single day. Not scared you'd be bad at it. Scared the world wouldn't deserve what you brought to it." A pause. "I think maybe this time it did." Emily sat in the car and let that settle into her, the way warmth settled, gradually reaching the parts that had been cold for a while. "Thanks, Mom," she said. "Don't thank me. Come home when you can. Eat something." Emily almost laughed. "I will." She drove back to Fort Carson and ate in the dining facility alone, and went to her quarters and slept for 9 hours straight, which was the longest she had slept in as long as she could remember. And when she woke up, she felt different, not transformed, nothing that dramatic but recalibrated, like an instrument that had been running slightly off and had been given the time to settle back to true. The formal inquiry against her was closed on day 11. The charge of unauthorized discharge was struck from her record with the specific bureaucratic efficiency of a system correcting itself. No ceremony, no explanation beyond the legal language of the withdrawal. Notice, note, no acknowledgement that the charge had represented the machinery of a conspiracy attempting to neutralize the person who had broken it. Just a document that said the charge no longer existed. Emily read it once and filed it. On day 14, Torres came to find her. He looked different from the man in the gym. Not lighter exactly, but settled like someone who had made peace with the full weight of a choice and was learning to carry it at a better angle. He found her on the range, which was where she went when she needed to think and couldn't sit still, and he stood behind her at a respectful distance until she finished her grouping and stepped back from the bench. "Carter," he said, "Torres." He looked at the target downrange for a moment. The grouping was tight, the kind of tight that happened when someone was doing something they had been doing for long enough that it had become more reflex than thought. "You ever get tired of being right?" he said. "I'm not always right," Emily said. "You were right about the ridge." "I was right about the ridge," she acknowledged. "I've been wrong about other things." "Name one." She looked at him. "I thought the note under my door was from someone with more information than fear." "It was from someone with more fear than information who did the right thing anyway." She paused. "That's a different thing, and it matters." Torres was quiet for a moment. "Pratt's going to testify," he said, "in exchange for reduced charges. His lawyers worked something out." "I know," Emily said. "Does that bother you?" Emily thought about it honestly. "No," she said. "What matters is what comes out in the testimony, not what Pratt gets in exchange for telling the truth." She paused. "He wrote 5 words on a piece of paper and put them under my door. That decision matters too, whatever he did before it. Torres nodded slowly. He picked up a piece of brass from the bench spent casing something the range officer had missed and turned it in his fingers. I've been asked to give a formal statement about the informal briefing. The map. Everything I told you. That's good, Emily said. Yeah. He set the brass down. I'm going to have to explain why I didn't come forward before. During those 3 weeks. Why I saw the ridge on the map and didn't say anything. He looked at her. I don't have a good answer for that. You have an honest one, Emily said. That's what they need. An honest one isn't going to feel good to say. No, Emily agreed, but you'll say it anyway, because that's what you do now. She looked at him steadily. Torres, you took a photo on your phone of a classified map because something felt wrong and you couldn't entirely let it go. That's not nothing. That's the thing that made everything else possible. Torres was quiet for a long time. The range was empty around them, just the two of them in the target downrange, and the Colorado sky doing what Colorado skies did in the late afternoon, which was turn a color that had no good name, but that felt to anyone who had spent time under it like something permanent. I looked up the two soldiers, Torres said finally, from 14 months ago. Their names. He stopped. One of them had a daughter, 7 years old when he died. Emily had known this. She had looked it up herself. She said nothing because there was nothing to say that would be adequate, and anything inadequate was worse than silence. I'm going to give the best statement I can, Torres said, the most complete and honest one I'm capable of. He looked at her. Not for Pratt's deal or the OIG's case or anybody's legal strategy. For them, for the two of them. Emily nodded. Good, she said simply. He left the range and she turned back to the bench and picked up her rifle and stood with it for a moment before she raised it, feeling the familiar weight of it. The specific weight that other people saw as a liability and that she understood as something different, as the accumulated mass of every hour of practice and every lesson learned and every decision made correctly in conditions that did not forgive mistakes. She fired 5 rounds. The grouping was as tight as the last one. She started to understand standing there that the weapon they had mocked was also a piece of the story now. Not because the rifle itself mattered, it was steel and glass and fitted wood. It didn't carry meaning in itself, but because the choice to carry it, the refusal to discard it, simply because something newer existed, the willingness to trust what she knew how to do, even when the room full of people with more expensive equipment implied she should be embarrassed by it. That was part of what had made the shot possible. She had not won because she was lucky. She had not won because of circumstances. She had won because she had spent years becoming very good at something that looked obsolete, and she had trusted that goodness when everything around her said not to. She thought that was worth something. She thought, actually, that it was worth quite a lot. On day 22, a hearing was convened to formally address the operational findings from the Hayes extraction. It was not a public hearing, classified proceedings, limited attendance. The kind of official gathering that happened in rooms where the fluorescent lights hummed and the air tasted recycled, and the weight of what was being discussed existed in careful contrast to the institutional plainness of the surroundings. Emily was called to give testimony. She gave it with the same clarity and precision she had given every account since the ridge, and when she was done, the officer leading the hearing looked at her for a moment and said, "Thank you, Sergeant Carter. Your testimony has been consistent and thorough throughout this process." Emily said, "Thank you, sir." He looked at his papers. "One more question. In your professional assessment, and I'm asking specifically for your assessment as an experienced field sniper, not as a witness, were the surveillance coverage parameters for the Hayes extraction designed to create the gap that the hostile element exploited?" The room was very still. Emily thought about the ridge, about the specific coordinates, about the way the gap in coverage corresponded exactly to the natural firing position she had identified from the map in the briefing room, about the years of practice it had taken to read a map well enough to see that correspondence in 45 minutes while everyone else in the room was looking at the route plan. "Yes, sir," she said. "In my professional assessment, those parameters were designed to create that gap. A random or accidental coverage failure would not have corresponded so precisely to the available firing position on the northeast ridge. The correspondence was too specific, too operationally advantageous, and too consistent with the secondary concealed position we found, which was placed with the same precision to be anything other than intentional." Another silence. "Thank you, Sergeant," the hearing officer said. "That will be all." She walked out of that hearing and stood in the corridor and felt for the first time since the night of the extraction, something that she could only call resolution, not relief, not satisfaction, but the particular feeling that comes when the last piece of a thing has been placed in the position it was always supposed to occupy. The case was complete, not finished. The legal proceedings would run for months, possibly longer, but complete in the sense of having the shape it was going to have, containing all the elements that it needed to contain, telling the true story rather than the controlled one. The investigation would reveal what it was going to reveal. The people who had built the system that killed 2 soldiers and tried to kill a general would face what they were going to face. The families of Specialist David Reyes and Sergeant First Class Marcus Webb, whose names Emily had memorized the night she looked them up, because she believed that knowing someone's name was the least and most important form of respect, would receive something more truthful than the explanation they had been given. None of it would feel like enough. Emily knew that. Knew it in the way you knew things that were too large to be fixed by any single act of accountability. But enough was not the standard. True was the standard. On day 31, General Hayes requested a meeting with Emily. This time not at the secure facility at Fort Carson in a conference room she had walked past dozens of times, in a building that smelled like every military building she had ever been in, which was a comfort in its ordinariness. Hayes arrived on time carrying his own coffee, which struck Emily as the kind of detail that said something accurate about a person. He sat down across from her and spent a moment just looking at her the way he had the first time, with the same uncomplicated directness. "I've been in communication with the Inspector General's office," he said, "and with the Army Personnel Command." He paused. "There's going to be a formal commendation for your actions on the ridge and for your role in the subsequent investigation. The recommendation is being processed at the command level." Emily started to say something. Hayes held up a hand, not dismissively but gently. "I know that's not why you did any of it," he said. "I'm not telling you because I think you need recognition as a reward. I'm telling you because the record matters. The official story of what happened matters not for you personally, but because the next soldier who trusts their instincts over a compromised command order is going to need to know that someone did it before them and the record supported them." He looked at her steadily. "You're going to be in that record." Emily thought about that, about being in the record, about the specific way that what you did became part of what the institution knew about itself, the evidence it had available about what was possible. "And the coverage system," she said, "the surveillance technology, the one with the designed-in blind spot." "Under full review," Hayes said. "The contract has been suspended pending investigation. The OIG is examining the design specifications against operational outcomes going back to original deployment." He paused. "It's going to be a significant process. But yes, the technology is being looked at the way it should have been looked at from the beginning." Emily nodded. This mattered to her in a specific way, not because she believed the technology was the enemy, but because she believed the technology was supposed to serve the people using it, and a system designed to fail its users was a fundamental betrayal of the idea that equipment was there to protect soldiers, not to create exploitable vulnerabilities in them. "There's something else," Hayes said. Emily waited. He reached into the folder in front of him and slid a single document across the table. Emily looked at it. It was a formal proposal. Army letterhead official language, recommending the establishment of a specialized assessment protocol for overwatch placements in operations using AI-assisted surveillance. A protocol that required human confirmation of coverage parameters from experienced field observers before operational deployment. A protocol that existed specifically to prevent the kind of designed-in gap that had made the Hayes extraction a controlled assassination attempt. At the bottom of the document, in the section listing contributing sources, Emily saw her name. This came out of the operational review, and Hayes said, "The findings from the investigation, the specific failure point, the assumption that technology confirmed by a command was sufficient that an experienced human observer's contradictory assessment could be safely overridden, generated a formal recommendation for a systemic change." He looked at her. "Your shot on the ridge is already changing how the Army thinks about the relationship between technology and human judgment." Emily sat very still. She read the document again. She read her name in the contributing sources section. She thought about this briefing room. The fluorescent lights, the long table, the 11 other operators with their expensive hardware. Torres asking what exactly a bolt-action sniper was going to add. The feeling of being invisible, of being redundant, of being assigned to a position that duplicated the drone coverage, and told her without saying it out loud that her presence was a formality. She thought about how close the whole thing had been, how precisely it had all been designed, how completely it would have worked if she had done what they needed her to do, which was nothing. "Sir," she said, "I have a question." "Go ahead." "The assessment protocol," she said, "the human confirmation requirement. If it had been in place before the Hayes extraction, if an experienced field observer had been required to confirm coverage parameters, would it have caught the gap?" Hayes looked at her. "Yes," he said, "almost certainly. A protocol requiring human confirmation would have required someone to look at the northeast ridge with fresh eyes, rather than accept the classification in Hargrove's parameters. And anyone with enough field experience to be qualified for the assessment would have flagged the ridge as a potential firing position." Emily thought about that, about the protocol that didn't exist yet, about the gap it was designed to close, about the shape of a system changing because one shot on one ridge had revealed the precise place where the system had been made to fail. "Good," she said. It was a quiet word. She meant it completely. Hayes finished his coffee and set the cup down and looked at her one more time with the expression of a man who had been thinking about something and had decided to say it. "I want to ask you something personal," he said. "And you can tell me it's none of my business." Emily waited. "When you were on that ridge," Hayes said, "with the order to stand down in 45 seconds in a shot that was at the edge of your range, what were you actually thinking about in that last moment before you fired?" Emily looked at him. She thought about the honest answer versus the acceptable answer and chose the honest one because Hayes had given her no reason to do otherwise. "My mother," she said. Hayes blinked. It was the one answer he clearly had not expected. "She told me once that I thought being good was the same as being careful," Emily said, "that they were different things. Careful people follow the protocol. Good people do what's necessary." She paused. "I thought about that, and then I fired." Hayes was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Your mother sounds like a wise woman." "She is," Emily said. He stood. She stood. He extended his hand across the table and she shook it, and his grip was firm and direct, the handshake of a man who meant what he communicated physically as much as verbally. "Sergeant Carter," he said, "thank you. For the shot, for not going quiet, for all of it." "Thank you for being worth it, sir," Emily said. It came out simply, and she meant it simply, and Hayes looked at her with something that might have been the beginning of a laugh swallowed into a nod, and then he picked up his folder and his coffee cup and walked out of the conference room. Emily stood at the table for a moment. Then she picked up her own things and walked out into the Fort Carson afternoon where the sky was doing what Colorado skies did, which was be enormous and indifferent and present in the way that large things were present, not noticing you but not requiring you to notice them either. She thought about the months ahead, the testimony that would continue to be required of her, the record that was being built document by document, statement by statement into something permanent, the protocol with her name in the contributing sources, the families of David Reyes and Marcus Webb who would receive something more true than what they had been given, which was not enough but was something, a truth to stand on solid ground where there had been constructed lies. She thought about Torres, who would give an honest statement and carry the weight of the weeks he had been silent, and who would do it anyway because that was what he did now. She thought about Pratt, who had slid 5 words under a door in the middle of the night and changed the direction of everything that followed. She thought about Mitchell, who had spent 6 weeks building a case from fragments, and who had known when Emily called that she was the witness who made those fragments into something real. She thought about Hargrove somewhere in a federal facility, in the specific quiet of a man who had believed so completely in the architecture of his own invulnerability that the collapse of it was still probably arriving to him in pieces. She felt no satisfaction in that. She felt the serious, sober reality of what it meant that someone with his access and his intelligence and his position had decided to use all of it the way he had. She felt the cost of it in the soldiers it had taken, in the years it had run, in the trust it had corroded. She felt the importance of the fact that it had been stopped. She walked to her car. She sat in it without starting it for a moment. She looked at her hands, the right one, specifically the one that had been on the trigger on the ridge. The hands of someone who had been trained to use a particular skill in particular conditions and had used it in the most important moment it had ever been required of her correctly. She started the car. She drove to the commissary because she was out of coffee and her mother had told her to eat something, and she bought coffee, and she bought the particular brand of crackers her mother always kept in the house. And she bought something real for dinner, which she had not been reliably doing, and she drove back to her quarters with the radio on playing something she didn't register the name of. But that had a good rhythm, and she parked and carried the groceries inside. She set everything on the small table in her quarters. She made coffee. She sat down. The notebook was still a day or two away in the mail, traveling from Kentucky to Colorado in its envelope, carrying its pages of small observations that had turned out to mean everything. She would have it back soon. She would keep it. On the wall of her quarters, there was nothing personal. Military housing didn't encourage it, and she had never been someone who decorated aggressively. But she had taped to the inside of the closet door, where she saw it when she got dressed in the morning, a small piece of paper with her mother's handwriting on it. She had carried it from base to base for 4 years. It said in her mother's clear, unhurried script, "The quiet ones see the most." She thought about that, about seeing, about the years she had spent learning to see things that were small and far away and easy to miss, and about the specific night when that skill had been the difference between a plan succeeding and a plan being broken. She thought about the 11 operators in the briefing room with their smart scopes and their AI targeting and their satellite surveillance. And she thought about the thing that none of it had been able to do, which was see a human being in a firing position who had been placed there by someone who knew exactly where the technology was and was not looking. The technology had not been looking because the technology had been designed not to look. But she had been looking because looking was what she did. Because she had never once believed that the absence of confirmation from a system was the same as the absence of a thing. And in that specific and crucial difference between what the system confirmed and what her eyes told her, the entire plan had broken. One soldier, one rifle, one shot, not because she was exceptional in the way that word usually meant, not because she had powers or advantages nobody else had, but because she had trusted in the moment it mattered the things she knew how to do, even when everything around her was telling her that what she knew was outdated, inadequate, unnecessary. That was what it came down to. She had trusted herself. She sat at the small table in her quarters and drank her coffee and thought that the world would probably not change dramatically because of what had happened. The machinery of large institutions changed slowly and incompletely, and the people who had been harmed by this one could not be fully made whole by any process, however thorough. There would be more Hargroves somewhere in some form, not the same, but the same category of person, the same category of choice, the same architecture of confidence in invulnerability that came from years of being allowed to build without consequence. But there would also be more records, more documented moments when someone had trusted what they saw over what they were told, more protocols built from the lessons of the failures, more evidence that the person everyone overlooked was sometimes the one who saw everything. She would be in that record, her name in the contributing sources, her shot in the operational review, her statement in the OIG files, her mother's crackers on the table, and her coffee going warm in the Colorado afternoon doing what Colorado afternoons did. She thought it's enough, not everything, never everything, but enough. She picked up her phone and sent her mother a message. "I'm home. I'm okay. I ate. I love you." The response came back in under a minute. Her mother had never learned to be slow about the things that mattered. "I know you're okay. You were always going to be okay. I love you too." Emily put the phone down and sat in the quiet of her quarters with her coffee and the particular afternoon light, and the knowledge that a plan built to bury the truth had been undone by the one variable it had failed to account for: a woman who refused to be invisible when it mattered. The soldier they had put on overwatch because they expected her to watch and say nothing had watched and had seen everything. And everything she had seen had changed everything they had built. That was not luck. That was not coincidence. That was what happened when you spent your life learning to see clearly and then refused at the moment it cost the most to close your eyes. The notebook arrived on a Thursday. Emily was at her desk when the mail clerk knocked, and she signed for the envelope without looking at the return address because she already knew what it was. She had been waiting for it the way you waited for something that didn't feel complete until it was back in your hands. She set it on the desk and looked at it for a moment without opening it And then she made coffee and sat down and opened it slowly, the way you open something that had traveled a long distance to get back to you. The envelope smelled faintly like her mother's house. That was not something she had expected, and it hit her somewhere below the chest in the specific way that ordinary things hit when they carried the weight of everything attached to them. She pulled the notebook out and held it. It was exactly as she had left it. Spiral-bound, slightly bent at the corner from being in her jacket pocket, the cover marked with the ring-shaped impression of a coffee cup she didn't remember setting on it. She opened it to the first page. The handwriting was hers, compressed and practical, the handwriting of someone who wrote to record rather than to express. The ridge coordinates, the note about the coverage gap, the observation about Torres, the 5 words she had copied down from the folded paper before giving the original to Mitchell. She turned through the pages slowly. It was a small document. 23 pages of actual writing, not all of them full. An outside observer reading it would not have found it dramatic. It read like a field observer's log, precise and brief, the kind of notes that looked modest, until you knew what they were notes about. But Emily knew what they were notes about. She closed the notebook and set it on her desk and sat there in the particular quiet of a person who has come to the end of something and is learning what the end feels like from the inside. Then she opened the notebook again and turned to the first blank page after her last entry. She picked up a pen. She wrote the date. And then slowly she began to write something new. Not an observation, not a field note, but something she had been thinking about for 31 days without finding the right form for it. She wrote for David Reyes and Marcus Webb. What happened to you was not an accident. You were not failed by conditions. You were failed by a person who decided you were acceptable losses in a plan he believed would never be examined. It has been examined. The examination is ongoing and will be complete. Your names are in the record now, in the true record, not the one that was constructed to cover what was done. I did not know you. I am sorry I did not know you sooner. I know your names now, and I will not forget them. She sat with what she had written for a long time. Then she closed the notebook and put it in the drawer of her desk, and she got up and went back to work. The weeks continued in the way weeks did during investigations, not evenly, not with the clean forward momentum of a mission, but in the stop-start rhythm of institutional process which moved fast in some places, and extremely slowly in others, and which required a different kind of patience than fieldwork, the kind that didn't have a specific target and a specific trigger, but just had to be sustained across indefinite time. Pratt's testimony was delivered in closed session on day 38. Emily was not in the room for it, but Mitchell called her that evening, and from the quality of Mitchell's voice, the specific weight it carried, the way it was both heavier and freer than usual, Emily understood that Pratt had done what Torres had said he would do. He had given the most complete and honest account he was capable of. 6 years, Mitchell said. He was inside this for 6 years. The full picture of it, Emily, the scale of what Hargrove built in 6 years is... She stopped. It's going to be a long case, but it's going to be complete, Emily said. It's going to be complete, Mitchell confirmed. The family attorneys for Reyes and Webb have been contacted by the OIG. The formal communication went out today explaining that the investigation into their deaths has been reopened with new evidence. A pause. One of them called me directly. Webb's wife. Emily waited. She said she knew something was wrong, Mitchell said. She said she had known for 14 months. She said the official explanation never fit the Marcus she had known the soldier. He was the care he took, and she had spent 14 months being told that her grief was distorting her judgment. Mitchell's voice was very controlled, the way it was when something was affecting her, that she wasn't going to let collapse her. She said thank you. She said it twice. Emily sat with the phone against her ear and the notebook in the drawer of her desk and the coffee going cold on the counter, and she said nothing for a moment because nothing was the honest response. Tell her she's not wrong, Emily said finally, about his care, about the soldier he was. Tell her that what happened to him is being accounted for completely. I already did, Mitchell said quietly. They stayed on the line in silence for a moment, the particular silence of two people who understood that some things didn't need to be filled. On day 44, something happened that Emily had not anticipated. She was on the range when Torres came to find her, which was becoming a pattern, him finding her on the range, and she thought there was something accurate in that, something about the kind of conversations that needed a space where things were direct, and the purpose of being there was clear. He had a look on his face she hadn't seen before. Lighter, not relieved, not exactly, but lighter. I gave my statement, he said. I know, Emily said. She had not been there for it either, but she had known when it happened. How was it? Hard, Torres said. Accurate. He paused. They asked me about the informal briefing, about the ridge on the map, about everything I noticed and didn't report. He looked downrange. I told them all of it, including the part where I decided to trust the protocol over what I actually saw because it was easier. Good, Emily said. The investigator told me that my account of the informal briefing confirmed 3 separate elements of Pratt's testimony from 2 days earlier. Torres looked at her. Things Pratt couldn't have known, I would say. The overlap was, she said it was significant. Legally. Emily understood. Independent corroboration. 2 accounts given separately, aligning on specific details neither witness could have coordinated. It was the structure of a case becoming solid. Torres, she said, how are you doing? Not with the statement. With you. He was quiet for a moment. He had the particular quality of a man who was not accustomed to being asked that question and was deciding whether to answer it honestly or deflect. He answered it honestly. I've been sleeping better, he said, which sounds like a small thing, but it's significant. I didn't realize how much I wasn't sleeping until I started sleeping again. He picked up another piece of brass from the bench, another stray casing, as if the range produced them specifically for his hands to have something to do. I've been thinking about what I want from the rest of my career, whether I want the same things I wanted before. What did you want before, Emily asked. Advancement, he said, promotion. The next rank, the next assignment, the standard trajectory. He turned the brass over. I still want those things, but differently, with different criteria for what I'm willing to do and not do to get them. He looked at her. Is that what happens when you go through something like this? Emily thought about it. I think it's what happens when you learn that the cost of the trajectory you're on is higher than you thought, she said, and you decide what you're actually willing to pay. Torres nodded slowly. He set the brass down. Carter, what are you going to do next after all this is formally processed? Emily had been thinking about this. She had been thinking about it with the specific attention of someone who had arrived at a point where the forward direction was genuinely open in a way it hadn't been before, not because her options had multiplied, but because her clarity about what mattered had sharpened. Stay in, she said. Do my job. She paused. I've been asked to contribute to the development of the new assessment protocol, the one Hayes told me about. They want someone with field experience in Overwatch operations to help design the human confirmation component. She looked at Torres. So I'm going to do that, and I'm going to keep being the kind of soldier I know how to be. Torres looked at her. Someone who trusts their eyes. Someone who trusts their eyes, Emily said. He left the range the same way he had come, and Emily turned back to the bench and picked up her rifle and held it for a moment before raising it. She thought about the protocol she was going to help build. The specific human element it was designed to preserve. The requirement that before any AI-confirmed surveillance parameter was accepted as final, an experienced field observer had to look at the terrain and say, yes, I have seen this with my own eyes and I agree. She thought this is also what the shot was for, not just to save the general, not just to break the plan, but to create the evidence that something needed to change and to be the witness to what the change should be. She raised the rifle. She breathed. She fired. The grouping was tight. On day 52, Mitchell came to Fort Carson for the last time in her formal capacity as the lead Army intelligence investigator on the case. She was handing the investigation off to the OIG for the remainder of the legal proceedings, which was protocol once the intelligence phase was complete and the case moved into prosecution. She found Emily after her shift, and they sat together in the small canteen near the training building and drank bad coffee, which seemed appropriate. Hargrove is cooperating partially, Mitchell said. Not Pratt-level cooperation. He's protecting specific people and specific information, which tells us where the remaining threads are. She wrapped her hands around the cup. But the core case is built. The OIG prosecutors are confident. The 2 soldiers, Emily said. Charges related to their deaths are included, Mitchell said. It took work. The legal standard for what happened to them is specific and difficult. But we got there. She looked at Emily. Because of the operational pattern evidence, the surveillance gap from the Hayes extraction matched against the gap from their mission. Hargrove designed the same blind spot twice. Same method, same architect. Emily let out a slow breath. 14 months. 14 months, Mitchell said. And it would have kept going. There were 2 additional contracts under consideration by the procurement board, both from companies with the same financial connections, both contingent on operational conditions that would have required similar intelligence anomalies to generate. She looked at her coffee. We estimated another 3 to 5 operations in the following 18 months that would have used the same template. Emily did the specific math of that in her head and then stopped doing it because the math led to places that served no purpose now except wait. Mitchell, she said, what happens to you after this? Mitchell looked at her with slight surprise, the way people who were always focused on other people's situations looked when someone turned the focus around. I go back to my regular caseload, she said, which is not uninteresting but is considerably less. She paused, searching for the word consequential in the immediate sense. You're good at this, Emily said. I know, Mitchell said. It wasn't arrogance. It was the honest self-assessment of a person who understood her own skills the way Emily understood hers. I've been doing it for 12 years. Will you stay in it? As long as they let me, Mitchell said simply. She looked at Emily. As long as there are things that need to be seen that people are trying to keep invisible. A pause. That's not going anywhere. They sat in the comfortable silence of 2 people who had moved through something significant together and come out the other side still recognizing each other, which was not guaranteed and was worth something. You know what I keep thinking about, Mitchell said. What? The note, Mitchell said. Pratt's note. 5 words. She shook her head slightly. In 6 years of building that operation with all of Hargrove's sophistication, all of his access, all of his careful management of every variable, a man with a piece of paper and a pen in his pocket, and 30 seconds of conscience in a corridor broke the whole thing. She looked at Emily. That's what I keep thinking about. Emily thought about it too. The 30 seconds in the corridor. Pratt walking past her door, stopping writing, sliding the paper under. 30 seconds of not walking away from the thing he had been walking away from for 6 years. Conscience is slow, Emily said, but it doesn't stop. Mitchell looked at her for a moment. No, she said, it doesn't. They finished their coffee. Mitchell stood and picked up her jacket, and they shook hands at the door of the canteen with the clean directness of people who had no unfinished business between them, only the completed kind. Carter, Mitchell said. Mitchell. The protocol, Mitchell said. The assessment protocol Hayes told you about. When it's implemented, and it will be, I've seen the internal momentum behind it. It's going to have your name attached to it in the institutional record. People who go through training on it are going to encounter your name. She held Emily's gaze. They won't all know the whole story, but some of them will look it up. Some young soldier on a ridge somewhere 20 years from now is going to read your name on a protocol and look up why it exists. Emily stood with that for a moment, with the specific gravity of it, the forward weight of a thing that would continue after this day, after this conversation, after the case was closed and the sentences were handed down and the world moved on to its next urgent thing. Tell the story right, Emily said, when they write it up. I will, Mitchell said. And she meant it the way people who were careful with truth meant things completely, and with the full understanding of what it cost to say so. She walked out of the canteen and Emily watched her go, and then turned back inside and got another cup of bad coffee because the afternoon was long and she had work to do. The work continued. It always continued. The assessment protocol meetings began in the 2nd month, and Emily sat in rooms with operational planners and intelligence analysts and technology specialists and contributed the things she had always contributed, which was the direct and undecorated account of what she had seen and how she had seen it. She was not a comfortable presence in those meetings. In the way that some people were comfortable, she did not soften her assessments or qualify her expertise out of deference to the people in the room with more institutional authority. She said what she had observed, and she said what she believed the protocol needed to account for, and she held her position when she was pushed back on. They pushed back less and less as the meetings continued. On the day the assessment protocol was formally drafted for submission day 78, a Tuesday in late afternoon, the lead planner, a lieutenant colonel named Barrera, who had started the process skeptical of adding a human confirmation requirement and had ended it as its most vocal advocate, looked at the document on the table and said, "This is the right thing. It should have existed from the beginning." Emily said yes. Barrera looked at her. "Are you satisfied with how this turned out?" Emily thought about it genuinely, the way she thought about things that deserved genuine consideration, rather than the answer that was expected. Satisfied isn't the right word, she said. The right word is responsible. I feel responsible for it, in the sense that it happened, and I was part of making it happen, and now it's mine to carry forward. She paused. Satisfied sounds like it's finished. It's not finished. It's just at a different stage. Barrera nodded slowly. Fair enough, he said. She drove home that evening, home meaning her quarters, meaning the small table and the drawer with the notebook in it and the piece of paper with her mother's handwriting taped to the inside of the closet door. She made dinner, actual dinner, the kind that required using more than one burner. She ate at the table. She called her mother. The protocol got drafted today, she said. Tell me what that means, her mother said, because she always asked Emily to explain, rather than assuming, which Emily had always appreciated. Emily explained it. The human confirmation requirement, the assessment process, the training mandate, her name and the contributing sources. Her mother listened all the way through without interrupting, which was also something she always did. So, her mother said when Emily finished, you fired one shot, and now every soldier who goes into that kind of operation has one more layer of protection between them and the thing that almost killed the general. Emily hadn't thought of it exactly that way, but it was accurate. That's right, she said. A pause. I want to ask you something, her mother said, and I want you to think about it before you answer. Okay. Are you proud of yourself? Emily sat with the question. It was a harder question than it looked because pride was complicated for her, not false modesty, not the performance of humility, but the genuine difficulty of looking at something she had done and assigning it the simple, uncomplicated warmth of pride when the thing itself contained so much that was not simple. The soldiers who had died, the 14 months, the families with wrong explanations, the near miss on the ridge. But her mother had asked her to think before she answered, and she was thinking. She had trusted what she saw. She had refused to be silent when silence was the designed outcome. She had fired a shot that everyone told her not to fire, and the shot had been correct. She had found Torres and she had found Mitchell, and she had written in a notebook in the small hours, and she had sat across from men trying to manage her and had not been manageable. She had done her job with everything she had in the moment it required everything she had when the people in charge of the situation had been counting on her to do nothing. Yes, Emily said, I'm proud of that again. Good, her mother said, simply warmly without elaboration, the way someone said a thing that didn't need elaboration. After she hung up, Emily sat at the small table in her quarters for a long time. The notebook was in the drawer. The piece of paper was on the closet door. The protocol was drafted and would be submitted and would become eventually the thing it was designed to be, a layer of protection, a requirement that human eyes confirm what systems report a formal acknowledgement that the person everyone overlooked might be the one seeing everything. She thought about the ridge one more time. The scope, the figure, the wind at 9 knots, the 45 seconds, the voicing on the comms. She thought about the specific instant between the decision and the pull, the fraction of a moment where everything she was and everything she knew converged on one necessary action. She had been ready for that moment her entire career without knowing it was coming. She would be ready for the next one. That was who she was. That was what she did. And no one, not a conspirator with 17 years of commendations, not a command voice telling her the technology had it covered, not a room full of operators with equipment that cost more than she'd ever earn, was ever going to take that from her again. Sergeant Emily Carter turned off the light and went to sleep, and the notebook stayed in the drawer, and the protocol sat in a digital folder waiting for signatures. And somewhere in Kentucky, her mother slept easily because her daughter had called, and somewhere in a federal facility, a man who had typed 4 words in the dark was beginning to understand what it meant to be seen clearly by someone you had tried to make invisible. And on a ridge somewhere in a gap in the coverage that no longer existed, the wind moved through empty air and found nothing there to use.